And we are live with today's N10-008 Network Plus Study Group pre-show. It is the pre-show. I'm getting things ready. We'll start at the top of the hour. You see, it's 10 minutes until the top of the hour now. This is my chance to make sure that everything's working properly. I could probably bring up the chat room, too. There's the chat. Hey, everybody in the chat room. Thanks for hanging out, waiting for this thing to go live. We'll get started in about 10 minutes with questions that I have written specifically for this month's study group, all about the Network Plus exam. So we'll step through all of those. Security Plus. Why do I have Security Plus listed sitting here on my desk? That's not going to help me. I need Network Plus. So there's always something going on. I'm going to do this real quick. We are in the right place. We got the Network Plus ready to go. I'm going to get the right books in front of me, which would be nice. And we'll get the right things on my screen, which is always nice too. That's all good. I hope everyone is having a fantastic day. We started the day in a tornado watch, if you can believe that. It looks like it's now gone off into some other area. So no longer do I have to worry about tornadoes during the live stream, which is good. Hopefully it'll work out just fine. So that part I like too. Now let's get some other things ready to go. Let's check some cameras, make sure everything's working properly, and it is, which I like. Now let's get the right objectives and other things up on my screen. So that this is why we have a pre-show, so that I can find the right things, put them up on the screen, get them ready to go. For some reason, I had Network Plus in my head today, or Security Plus in my head today, even though we were doing a Network Plus live stream today. So there must be something going on in my head all about Security Plus, but there's not. It's all Network Plus today. Let's get the objectives ready to go as well. Those are good. There they are. I'll get those up just in case somebody has questions about those. We'll have those ready to go. Now we're in better shape. And we can flip back to the chat room. Hey, chat room. How's everybody doing? Thanks for being here. It looks like Bob had power issues that came on just in time. I don't know about our power issues here yet, but everything's sort of pushed off to the east, so I don't think I have to worry too much about power today. Hello, Alabama. Thanks for being here. There's Virginia checking in. Hello, Queens, New York. I got lots of folks checking in. Thanks for being here. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. We've got all new questions today. Yeah, it is kind of warm all over the northern part of the country. 80 degrees Fahrenheit today in Queens, New York. So true. Today it's going to be 82 here in Florida. So you might as well be in Florida because New York, Queens, New York, just like Florida in every way. Hello, there's some Floridians checking in. Thanks for being here. We have Niagara Falls, New York checking in. Beautiful area near Buffalo, which is, I've been there as well. Fantastic area. There's South Africa checking in. We got Sarah taking Network Plus next week. Best of luck. This should be a nice primer, a nice overview, a nice final check. See what's going on. Vegas is here. Shane, are you asking South Florida that you don't know where you are or you don't know where I am? Those are two different things. So that's sort of how it works. Florida's a big place. We got a lot going on here. Let's see what else we have. Tampa. Michael's in Tampa. Good to have you here. LA's checking in. Hudson Valley, New York's here. Ghana is here. Thanks for being here. Riverside, California. Panama's here, which is different than Panama City, Florida, which is near me here in Florida. It's a little different. And of course, Panama City, Florida is very close to Mexico Beach, Florida. So that would really, you tell people, oh, I'm going to Mexico Beach. They go, you're going to Mexico? No, I'm going to Mexico Beach. And then we're going over to Panama City. You're going to Panama? No. We're going to, it's very complicated. We never do things quite the way you would expect here in Florida. It's always a little bit of a twist on it. That's okay. We like it that way. Germany's here, and Ghana and Liberia and Nashville and India and Minneapolis. Yeah, Minneapolis is uncharacteristically warm as well. A lot going on there. Haven't been to Minneapolis in a long time. When I went to Minneapolis, last time I was there, it was during the winter. Don't know if you've ever been to Minneapolis in the winter. Of course, you in Minneapolis have. I rented a car at the airport. It was back in the day where the tops of cars were kind of sloped on the side. So you open the door and snow would fall into your car, which probably wasn't the best choice for that particular part of the world, but that's the way the cars were. And the snow fell in the car, and I closed the door, and I drove to my hotel. And then the next day I got up and drove to the office and then drove back to my hotel. And I noticed when I got back out of the car at the hotel after a day, I looked down and the snow that fell in my car the day before was still in my car. It had not melted. So that gives you some perspective, even though I'd driven. Like the drive wasn't long enough for me to heat up the inside of the car. So that's sort of, you guys in Minneapolis and up north, you're much stronger than I am. That's all I got to say. I can't handle that cold. It's something I just cannot do. I am physically unable. I guess I could if I had to, but I'm in Florida and I'm a little whiny about the cold. So that's fine. That's just how I am. And I think I can be a little bit. It got down to 50 this week. Ooh, freezing. We wrapped the pipes. I covered up everything. No, it wasn't that bad, but we're not used to that. And being in that, hey, Mal, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us again in St. Vincent. Glad folks are checking in. We have all new questions today. Network Plus questions. About 3 minutes to go until we get started. Brazil. I thought you were in checking things out. And I didn't know you were going to be here. Let's Play. So thanks for joining us. I thought I saw in the chat earlier that you weren't going to be here. But that's maybe you'll hear for a second. Here to say hi, which is fine too. You're welcome to stay as long as you would like, as well as everyone else. Good to have you here. Let's turn down some of these lights on my screen. A little bit lighter or darker. That's a little bit better to my eyes. I think we're in pretty good shape. Recordings are going. Streaming looks relatively good. All the numbers are good. I was kind of concerned because the warnings, I woke up this morning to watches, tornado watches being listed for my area. And I thought, well, of course, because we're doing a live stream, that's what you want to have happen during a live stream. Which is to say, I do not want to have that happen during a live stream because we're going to lose a network connection. There's going to be, I'm not worried about the tornado as much as I am worried about the internet connectivity because of a tornado. I guess both of those things are bad in my world. Of course, I don't want a tornado to hit anywhere in my area, but when there's wind and there's rain and there's storms, you're always worried that there's going to be a coax or a fiber that falls off of the side of the highway, and then of course now your internet's down, and we never know how long that's going to take after that. So we'll figure out the details once we get into it. But now that it's passed by, I looked at the weather, everything sort of missed us, so that was good. Now I think we'll probably be in pretty good shape. Knocking on whatever wood I have available here for the live stream. We got a minute and a half before we get started. Have a look. Is there Starlink in my region? I think there is Starlink available in Florida, isn't it? I think it is. I haven't really checked most recently. That would be a good backup if it was something I could reasonably set up. Because obviously you have to set up the equipment, not just the equipment in your home, but there has to be an antenna. And there's all kinds of challenges with antennas in Florida. And the lightning associated with those. So you have to be very particular about how those are installed and all of the things that come along with that. So currently not really looking at Starlink. What I'm hoping for is that 5G will provide speeds for me locally that would be a comparable alternative or backup for this. Now, I realize, of course, if there's major problems in an area, those major problems could indeed affect the mobile phone providers as well, mobile data providers. But that's sort of how that works, and figure out where they go. We've got a lot going on. We'll get started here in just a moment. Before we do, might as well check these. There we go. Mahad says, thanks to your videos, got my A+ and Security Plus, also pin test, although I technically don't have a pin test course. Failed Network Plus 3 times within 2 years. Network Plus is a different animal than A Plus and Security Plus. I don't have to tell you. You know this already. But it is a challenge to make that happen. So I absolutely understand. Next week, got it scheduled again. Well, this is your final check. Thanks also for the $9.99 super chat. That's pretty nice. And we sure appreciate that support as well. We'll get you through this Network Plus. It'll be fun. We'll make that happen. Let's close out, or actually, let's move the chat over to here. Let's move my study group content over to here. Boom. Let's clear out all the things I have for these pieces. Let's now get a live stream started. This will be fun. Here we go, everybody. Let's get the show underway for this right here. There we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April 2023 Professor Messer N10-008 Network Plus Study Group. This is the study group where I ask you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. And hopefully somewhere in here, you'll be able to answer them online. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. And maybe we'll learn something in the meantime. That's the whole idea. And hopefully we can go through not only the questions and the answers, but if you stick around for the second hour, I open up the chat room for questions and you can ask anything you'd like of Network Plus, of technology, of life in general. You're welcome to ask whatever you'd like. I don't know that I'll answer anything that you would like, but I'll certainly take your questions in that second hour. So make sure you jot those down, make a note of them. You're more than welcome to put those in the chat in the second hour. What we are going to concentrate on today, though, is concentrate on learning Network Plus. I have questions for you in this first hour that come from the Network Plus exam objectives, and you are able to answer them live and online if you happen to be here when we are performing this live stream. We have this live stream up and running. The way that you would do that is go out to your favorite browser, pop open a new browser window, and browse to that URL, professormesser.com/QA. That will get you there. There's a question even waiting for you on the screen if you happen to go there right now. I also have for you an app that you're able to use. It's actually Socrative that has the app. That's the service we use for the Q&A. Go to your favorite app store. You want to download the app for the Socrative student app. Make sure you get the student app. The teacher app is the one I use. And use the room name of Professor Messer, all one word, PROFESSORMESSER, and that will get you to a question that is on your screen. Now, I'm looking at the questions that are on my screen versus the questions that are on your screen. I'm not seeing the right ones off the top of my head. So if you will bear with me one moment while I have a look at all of these. This is really the challenge when you're doing a live stream, is that you pull up something, it's on the screen, you're looking at it, you're breaking down where all these questions are. And I think this is one where I need to make sure that all of these are correct. Let's have a look at the next one. You're going to see questions kind of flip around if you are logged in properly. Well, that looks fine. I don't know why I have one question up on my screen and one question up on the other. So instead of giving you an incorrect question of something else you would not be expecting, let me tell you that I want to thank you for being here. One of the things that we always do is we have these live streams for Network Plus. I do one of these every month. And we also have other things that we're doing throughout the month. So if you're not part of our YouTube channel, if you don't follow us on Twitter, if you're not on our LinkedIn or Instagram or in our Discord chat, you may have no idea that we have plenty of resources available to you even after we're done here. So go to professormesser.com/YouTube/Twitter/Instagram, and you can, of course, find everything that we are doing when we are not live on these channels. Let me give you a question. If you're able to get into, look at the questions that are available. Here's a question that's waiting for you that says, a database administrator is configuring a MySQL database for a new application. What port number would most likely be used by this service? Is it TCP 3306, TCP 1433, TCP 443, TCP 1521, or TCP 3389? So this question is one from last month. I told you these would be all new questions, though. Our very first question of the study group is always a rewind question to make sure you're able to get into the live stream, make sure you're able to answer questions on our Q&A platform, make sure that everything's working the way it should be. And it looks like a number of you are already. We're going to come back to this question in just a moment and see how you did with the details of this. This live stream is going to be talking about the latest version of the Network Plus exam. This is the N10-008. It was released in September of 2021, which means we estimate a retirement for this certification to be somewhere around March of 2025. That's probably about right. Now, that's an estimate. Once we get closer to that date, we'll have much better an update from CompTIA directly. But what's interesting about that is we sit here in April of 2023, you can see that you have plenty of time to work through these exam objectives. Nobody's going to change the objectives on you. The exam itself isn't going to change. You're studying exactly the right information as long as you are studying materials that are clearly marked N10-008. So make sure you look at your videos, at your books, at your practice exams, at anything else you're using. As long as it says N10-008, you got the right stuff. So make sure you use those. This is a 90-minute exam. It's just a single exam. You might get up to 90 questions on this exam. You might get fewer than that, but the max is 90 questions. And you have to score a 720 on this unusual scale from 100 to 900. It's already a little confusing to understand how they do the grading. I think that's by design. I don't know what they plan on doing behind the scenes to give you the final score. And in fact, there's no way to determine that. We don't know how many points each question is worth. We believe they're worth a different number of points for different types of questions. So in other words, don't worry so much about the scoring system. You should worry about if you're scoring a 720 or not. And there's no way to calculate that before you hit the final button to submit your exam. So don't worry about the mechanics behind it. Just worry about knowing everything that's on the exam objectives, and you will be in great shape. The exam itself consists of both multiple choice questions and what CompTIA calls performance-based questions, and we'll talk about those in just a moment. Of course, there is a lot of information on this exam. If you look at my videos, there are so many videos for Network Plus, full of information about networking, the acronyms associated with networking. There's so much in there, but we have taken all of our videos and made them available for you to watch online. But a number of people would like offline versions of these videos, and I have offline versions, course notes, and other things available as part of my Network Plus Success Bundle. You can find that on my website at professormesser.com/netsuccess. There are also audio replays available of this live stream available in podcast format. So if you have a podcast listening program or you use the podcast app that's on your mobile phone, you can simply add our podcast to that list. You can find the link to that RSS at professormesser.com/podcast. I have podcasts there for A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus. It's a great way to automatically have all of these live streams downloaded to your mobile device so you can listen in the car, you can listen when you're working out, or places where perhaps watching a video would not be appropriate. But of course, there are video replays of this available as well out on my YouTube channel. I have a playlist just for the Network Plus study group. And if you look at the YouTube video description, usually about tomorrow, about this time frame, we will have timestamps available. I say we, like I have anything to do with it. Nope, Lori, my marketing manager, is watching this. Hi, Lori. She's going through and watching all of this probably at 2x speed. And she is putting in all of these timestamps for you. So you can easily click on the timestamp and find exactly what you're looking for in this video or any of our other videos that we might have here. So have a look at those. They'll be updated usually about a day after we are finished here. It's that's a lot of hard work. So thanks, Lori. The chat room is thanking you as well. She watches all of the chat go by as well in real time. So if you enjoy getting these timestamps, you like having them there, make sure you thank her in the chat room as well. She really appreciates that too. Also let you know that when we're not doing a live stream, we're over on Discord. You can join us there, professormesser.com/Discord. That Discord server is one that is always available. There's always somebody in there studying for their Network Plus exam. People like to do study groups together, just sort of ad hoc study groups. We'll create themselves. We have a way on our Discord that you can click a button and create your own study group with your own audio and video channel. And you can have people join that, and you will be in charge. You will be the administrator for that group. And then when everybody leaves the group just magically disappears. It's a great way to learn. A lot of people are there at all times of the day going through Network Plus studies. Some people will watch videos together. Some people will do Q&A together. It's a fantastic community. We'd love you to join us at professormesser.com/Discord. I'll also let you know that if you do have a look at some of the different options available on the website, you'll notice that you can purchase vouchers on the Professor Messer website, which is a pretty interesting thing because you could go over to the CompTIA website and pay full price for your vouchers, or you can come over to professormesser.com and I'll give you exactly the same voucher for a discounted rate if you are in US or Canada or a number of US territories. This not only includes the vouchers at a discounted price, and you don't need special discount codes or special enhancements inside of your browser to be able to enable those discounts. They're just available. Not only am I discounting the vouchers, I'm even giving you more than just the voucher. You'll get a copy of my Exam Hacks ebook, something you can't purchase on its own. It's only available with my Success Bundles, and when you purchase a voucher, it's got a list of all the tips and tricks that I've accumulated in my years of taking these certification exams. I must have 20 or 25 certification exams under my belt at this point. And I've tried to take everything about these CompTIA exams and give you every possible advantage I can, not only for the study process, but during the exam itself. Read through those list of tips and tricks. Maybe it can give you some strategies you can use during the exam to get a few extra points. And sometimes a few extra points is what you definitely need when you're working through those. Let's have a look at the question I asked earlier, which was a database administrator is configuring a MySQL database for a new application. What port number would be most likely used by this service? Is it TCP 3306, TCP 1433, TCP 443? We've got TCP 1521 and TCP 3389. This is always a good question. If you're somebody working on a database and you're trying to determine what should I be using on my firewall to allow or disallow certain database traffic, this is a question you will definitely be posed with. So let's have a look at what you thought this particular question might be. If we look at the results, we can see we're all over the place. This is sort of the results we got on the original time we asked the question last month. So let's have a look at databases and the different port numbers that we would be expected to know. So this is a real interesting challenge. If you're running Microsoft SQL Server, or as we say here in the South, Squirrel Server, because that's sort of what it is, it's a TCP 1433 is the default port number. We also have Oracle. The Oracle has a SQLnet, or some people just call it the Oracle database functionality. OracleNet or Net 8 is TCP 1521. But our question was about MySQL, which is a different SQL-based database. Interestingly enough, also owned by Oracle now, but it still remains a free and open source database, uses TCP 3306. So there you've got all of the database ports you need to know for this exam. And if we're trying to find out TCP 3306 associated with MySQL, that would be the very first option at the top of your screen. Answer A, 30% got that one absolutely right. Of course, 1433 is the Microsoft SQL Server. 1521 down here on option D is your Oracle Net 8 SQL Server. And then you've got TCP 443, which is HTTPS, so your encrypted web and browser traffic. And you have, of course, breakdown of TCP 3389, which is commonly used for your remote desktop. Now, I noticed that the website connectivity, if you got to see my website breakdown, you can see that we are having a bit of congestion, an expected part of this. So I think as you go through and try to understand what are we going to expected when you get into a scenario like this, that there would be cache numbers kind of come up as we are watching the breakdown are slowly degrading. It's sort of down and up and down, which means we're a little bit more of this. So let me tell the chat. Congestion ISP, please, that we're able to get that thing. These live streams, you just never know what you might run into through those. And people are even saying the stream, it's cutting in a YouTube primary server to the secondary server. I have a sneaking suspicion, because I'm looking at the packet loss stats now, that it's a mix of different things. Seeing congestion. Please stand by. We'll let the chat room know that that's exactly what's going on. I suspect that this issue is related to the local weather issues in the area. So we'll see if that's the case, and we'll break them down from there as well. I think there's a lot we could look at too on the primary and secondary side. And I'm seeing some sort of swings with congestion, with it working, with it not working. And it looks like now things have popped back up to, oh, okay, we're working again. So that's sort of to be expected. As I mentioned during the intro on the live stream, we sort of expected that there would be some type of congestion or breakdown associated with the storms that are coming through this area. As I mentioned before the live stream, we are under a tornado watch in this area, so not entirely unexpected. And if it happens again, I will slow down and stop things so that we can continue on. You will miss nothing with the live stream. So hopefully that gives you some familiarity with the port numbers we were looking at. Let's do some more of the things that we would like to do. I've got an interesting challenge for you coming up as we have a look at the next question on our list. Is not a multiple choice. Many of you know I like to see how this all works out. Okay. But certainly that's some parts is I'm giving this congestion and the deal not uncommon, unfortunately, and be able to provide you with another line. They decide to their issues, figure starting to see some of the numbers having them to resolve fee. But of course, that's the live stream and having all of those. Well, don't miss anything. And right where we are having outages based on this. So we'll have to see. Let's go. This would be good. I'm watching the cache numbers, and they certainly are not connectivity issues sort of on the connectivity all the way on the East Coast, or at least which is side too. So this may be YouTube. What we're seeing is now we'll have to see where we're really running into issues with this. Some of it's locally, some of it's in a different location too. So be patient. We'll get all of this up and running in just a moment. This won't take but a second, I'm sure, for them to figure out where the congestion is and resolve that problem and sort of get things running. Most of what I'm seeing is definitely later on. It's actually in some cases past the Comcast network. So I'm seeing a couple of different places where there may be problems. Some of it's local, but some of it is actually in a different location as well. So we'll have to see. This is the challenge with doing a live stream, is you just never know when that type of thing is going to work. And whenever you're working through an ISP's issues, it's really. And let's see how we do now. Immediately go on the air. Server is having similar problems. I think that's the same issues that we have with the other. So at this point, we're already almost 40 minutes in, and we're not able to get up and running. So we may just decide to do this tomorrow, which is fine too. I think given the difficulties with the weather and everything else that we're seeing, this is a little bit of a challenge. The congestion appears to be on Atlanta server. So that's the challenge, of course, is that once you're down, that's about it. That's all you're going to be able to do. So we're sort of waiting at this point and chatting with the chat room over what we can do with the congestion that we're seeing. That's okay. We'll find a way to work through that particular challenge. The YouTube primary server is where we are, and you can see the YouTube primary server does appear to be back up and running. So that is one where maybe we're able to be through the congestion or not. We will have to see. That's a rather solid 3%, which is where we need to be. So I think instead of switching and changing things, we're back up and running now. Why don't we do a live stream? I mentioned earlier that I have for you a performance-based question of the month. And indeed, this performance-based question is one that is not a multiple choice-based question. It's a question that instead is anything but multiple choice. It's one where you are being asked questions that are fill in the blank, maybe a drag and drop. Maybe you're being asked a question that is something that is a matching question. Maybe you have to perform a particular function on the screen. Maybe you're put down into a command prompt and asked to perform a function. One of those might be the case. So I have for you a performance-based question of the month. And here is what we are doing with our performance-based question of the month. Let's see how well you can do this one. This next question asks, what OSI layer would be most associated with the following? And I have 5 different steps that you can go through, 5 different options here that have OSI layers associated with them. The first is that a bank website shows your current account balance. What OSI layer is associated with that? A company blocks TCP 3389 at their internet firewall. What OSI layer is associated with that one? An unknown destination MAC is forwarded to all switch interfaces. Again, there's got to be an OSI layer associated with that. Which one would you put into that list? A signal on a fiber optic link is repeated every 5 kilometers. And the last one is a device's subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. If you think you know these answers, you want to submit the answers on the link that's on your screen, professormesser.com/QA. There it is at the bottom of the screen. That is the link that you can use to plug in your answer to this question. OSI model is an important one. It's one of the first things you have to know in the exam objectives. Make sure you are familiar with where you would put each one of these scenarios into the OSI model. Again, for those of you listening in, the OSI model says a bank website shows your current account balance. We need an OSI model for that one, or an OSI layer. A company blocks TCP 3389 at their internet firewall. An unknown destination MAC is forwarded to all switch interfaces. A signal on a fiber optic link is repeated every 5 kilometers, and a device's subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. So which one of these, or for all of these, what OSI layer would you most associated with each one of those? Now, if you think you know the answer, plug it in by going to professormesser.com/QA and locking in your answer. And then we're going to step through each one of these and see if what I think the OSI layer happens to be matches what you think the OSI layer happens to be. So all of these are pretty specific. There are some clues within each one of these particular descriptions that should at least point you into a direction for these OSI layers. Now, if you have no idea what we're talking about, or you're not really strong on the different OSI layers, then make sure you listen into this answer, because we're going to go through each one of these to determine where was that very key piece of information and how would we interpret that into the proper layer of the OSI model. So let's step through each one at a time and see how we did. We'll start with the very first one at the top, which is a bank website shows your current account balance. So it's probably a 3-digit number, 2-digit number. It's a 1-digit number. Well, in any case, it's showing us information on the screen. It's allowing us as humans to be able to interact with this particular application. That puts it squarely into a layer 7 of the OSI model, the application layer. That's what we were hoping to find, because we're using this application, we're interacting with this application, we can see information being presented to us from this application. Therefore, it fits absolutely into the application layer. Next on our list is a company blocks TCP 3389 at their internet firewall. It's blocking a very specific thing. It's blocking TCP port 3389. This is a port number, and if you look at how port numbers are associated with the OSI model, you'll know that you'll squarely put these into layer 4 of the OSI model. That is where we really put anything that might be a port number, something relating to TCP or something relating to UDP, you should immediately put into layer 4 of the OSI model. And third on our list is an unknown destination MAC is forwarded to all switch interfaces. This is obviously not a Mac Macintosh. This is a MAC address. So this is one where we need to understand where MAC addresses fit into the OSI model. And in this case, this is sort of a normal part of switching. If a switch receives a packet, in this case a frame, that has a MAC address in it that is unknown, then you're in the case where you're really struggling through all of the different ports. You have to find where this particular frame happens to go. Well, instead of sending it directly to the device, we don't know where that MAC is. It's an unknown destination MAC. Therefore, we should be able to forward this to all switch interfaces. And because it's a MAC address and we're switching, that fits squarely into OSI layer 2. That media access control is an important part of this. And anytime you're getting into data link control, DLC addresses, layer 2 addresses, MAC addresses, they are all effectively the same type of technologies. They fit into OSI layer 2. Next on our list is a signal on a fiber optic link is repeated every 5 kilometers. Here we're not focused on MAC addresses. We're not focused on IP addresses, subnet masks. There's no application to view. This is simply taking a signal, refreshing the signal, and sending it. It's on its way. That's what a repeater does. A repeater has no idea what's inside of this data, has no idea what MAC address is being used, has no idea what IP address is in there. All it knows is data is coming in. I need to take those zeros and ones and repeat them out the other side of the repeater. That's as intelligent as it gets. If there's data going in here, I need to send the data out there. There's no extra lookups. There's no routing table. There's no switching table. It's all happening at the signal level. Therefore, it is a physical layer or layer 1 of the OSI model. And then lastly, we have a device's subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. Your subnet mask is probably that subnet mask on your system. That is one where we're dealing with IP addresses. We're working through challenges with understanding how to manage IP addresses, subnet masks, default gateways, DNS server IP addresses, anything relating to IP and specifically relating to TCP IP fits very squarely into layer 3, the network layer of the OSI model. That's what we were looking for. So a bank website showing your current account balance is layer 7, the application layer. Company blocking TCP 3389 at their internet firewalls, layer 4. Unknown destination MAC addresses. Anytime we see a MAC address, it's layer 2 of the OSI model. A signal on a fiber optic link is repeated every 5 kilometers. That is layer 1. And lastly, a device's subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. That's layer 3. And those are the layers we need to know for today's performance-based question. There's a lot that we have to work through, but hopefully that will give you something that you can work through and being able to understand what the different options might be. Also want to, before we go to our next question in our list, we'll flip back to some multiple choice-based questions in a moment. I want to thank Joanna in the chat room with a $10 super chat who says, "Thank you, Professor Messer. I passed my Network Plus exam on Monday. Those performance-based questions were something else." And yes, they are. But the key for performance-based questions, and anyone who's taken the exam will tell you this, is that they cover topics that come directly from the exam objectives. So they're not asking you something that you wouldn't know. They're not asking you something that's a surprise. They're asking you about information that comes directly from the materials they've already provided to you where they've told you these might appear on the exam. It's just another certain way that, or a very, very specific way to ask these questions that are different than a multiple choice question. Hopefully, this has given you some idea of how a performance-based question might be on your system and might be resolved for you. So make sure you're familiar with those as we go through them. I have more questions for you. There's plenty more that we're going to go through. So let's jump into a question that is a multiple choice based question. This next one on our list asks, a TDR has identified an open circuit on a category 6A link between buildings. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Would we attach a loopback adapter, use a fiber transceiver, configure both sides for 1000 full, install a repeater, or replace the cable? The question again asks, a TDR has identified an open circuit on a category 6A link between buildings. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Would we attach a loopback adapter, use a fiber transceiver, configure both sides for 1000 full, install a repeater, or replace the cable? All of these are valid troubleshooting steps, but only one of them fits for this particular example. If you think you know the answer, please no answers in the chat room. You want to go to the link that's on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, and lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room as you go through this. It should be a good one to step through. See if you're familiar with what this might be. This might be a good one to step through as we go through the different options, the different links that we happen to have for this particular question. As I step through the questions and we're sort of going through where you might go with problems like this, it's useful to know what these different options are. And certainly knowing everything that's in the question is going to be critical as you step through these, because the questions have a lot of hints inside of them that's going to lead you down a particular path. So this is a very good example of where the hints are in the question. So what would we do from a troubleshooting perspective? There's a whole section on the exam objectives about troubleshooting. So make sure you're very familiar with the troubleshooting parts of it and where you would go with this. This is one that a number of you have locked in your answers already. Let's see if you really know what the answer might be. Let's look at this question again, and it asks, a TDR has identified an open circuit on a category 6A link between buildings. Which of the following would be the best next step to resolve this issue? Would it be attach a loopback adapter, use a fiber transceiver, configure both sides for 1000 full, install a repeater, or replace the cable? Let's see how you did with this particular question. Let's show the results, and we can see that 66% of you, 2/3 of you, say that it is replace the cable. 12% said install a repeater. 11% said attach a loopback adapter. It's almost a tie for both of those, being able to work through them. That's very useful. We also have options that people chose. 5% or 6% said configure both sides for 1000 full. 5% said use a fiber transceiver, effectively a two-way tie for third place. So the bulk of you, the majority of you, say replace the cable. But there's a third of you that say there's other options other than replacing the cable that you should choose. I think we now need to go back and look at the question and see, where does this go? How are we determining what the best step might be? First, we have identified an open circuit. So we need to understand what an open circuit happens to be. That means that we don't have a short circuit where wires are touching. We have an open circuit where a wire is no longer touching. It's effectively a break. So if somebody's out there with a backhoe, if somebody has been shoveling and they're putting a tree in and they're digging a hole, they could have very easily dug right through the cable that you have between these buildings, and now we have an open circuit. We have a cable that has been cut. That's cable cut. It's a fancy way of saying somebody broke my cable. We have an open circuit that we're having to deal with. So if you have a broken cable, the cable has been split in two, and it is an open circuit. Now we need to find a way to be able to resolve that open circuit? How can we fix that problem? It's not intermittent, it's open. It's one where we don't have anything we can do with this at all. So we need to do some troubleshooting. If it is something that's intermittent, we may want to move the cable around, move the wires around, and see if we can work through it. But if it is an open cable, and in some cases, if it's a short, where we're starting to have cables or pieces of copper inside of that cable touch each other, then it may be extremely difficult to repair this. And in fact, something where someone's cut through the cable is almost impossible to repair. There may be some short-term repairs you can do to it, but if you wanted to fix that problem, the best thing you can do is just to replace the entire cable. That's really the key. If this was fiber connection, we might have other options. And even for copper, there are some options available in certain circumstances that might allow us to repair the broken existing cable. But in almost every case, that particular connection or repair that you're going to do is going to be a temporary repair. The best repair for this is to easily connect all of this with a brand new cable. That's the best one. But the options you have, that indeed was the best next step to resolve this issue, because that is the problem that we were running into. We replaced the cable. 68% of you say to replace the cable. That is the right answer. That's the one we were looking for. But what about these other options? Why couldn't we use one of those other options to resolve this issue? Let's step through the different options you chose. 11% of you said install a repeater. And although a repeater is designed to take a signal, regenerate the signal, and send that signal on its way, effectively creating another link with a much stronger signal on the end of it. Our problem here wasn't a weak signal. It wasn't that some of the data was getting through and some of the data wasn't getting through. This is an open circuit. And by definition, an open circuit doesn't allow any signal through. There's nothing going between those connections. If you were to put a repeater in place, you would have a repeater not repeating any data because the connection is broken. So a repeater is not going to work for you either. A loopback adapter that 10% of you said, loopback adapters are great for testing an interface to see if the interface that's on your system is a problem, if the router interface, a switch interface, or some other device interface is the issue. But our question clearly told us that it wasn't the issue. The problem is an open circuit. So it has nothing to do with the interfaces on our routers or our switches or other devices. The problem is something relating to the cable and how the wire inside of the cable is no longer touching each other between point A and point B. We've also got other options that people chose. Configure both sides for 1,000 full. So gigabit speeds at full duplex is what that means. That 1,000 full is probably what it's configured for now if it's a gig connection. But because it's an open circuit, you can configure it for half duplex, full duplex, 1,000 megabit, 100 megabit, 10 megabit. It's not going to work because the connection has been severed. There is no connection there. You're not able to put any data between those. And lastly, use a fiber transceiver. Well, that might be an option if the question told us we had a separate unused fiber link available. Maybe we could use that link instead. That's not an unusual thing to run into, by the way. If you're spending the time and money to run a cable between one building and another, then you're probably putting multiple cables into that conduit. Why wouldn't you? While you've got the conduit there, while you're pulling cable, don't just pull one cable, pull multiple cables, pull some fiber, put multiple connections in that link. That way, if somebody breaks one of those connections or you find that it's no longer working, you can use one of the other wires inside of that. But in this question, that option wasn't available to us. It didn't say there's other options, there's other links, there's other cables, there's other fibers. It just said use a fiber transceiver. And using a fiber transceiver on a copper connection isn't going to help you very much. That's not the right answer either. The only answer that would be the best next step in this following set of answers is indeed answer E, replace the cable. 69% of you got that one absolutely right. That is the right answer. That's the one we were looking for. And hopefully now when you run into an open circuit, you'll know exactly where to go with that. Now I have for you a lot of other questions that are in here. I'm going to skip back real quick. I'm going to look at a couple of extra things that are on my side because I stuck another question in here. Now I'm trying to decide if I want to give you this other question. That's the problems that I run into, is trying to decide, do I give you this next question or do I think it would be a good one to see if we remember one of the things that we worked through with these questions, and I think it would be a good one to break down. So I am going to give you this one. I think this is a good one to go through because we did just go through these topics. This would be a good one to see if we remember what we just learned. So for those of you that send me emails all the time that say, can you do more OSI questions? We're about to do one. So let's see if you know what this one might be. This question asks, a security administrator has configured a firewall rule to block all traffic using TCP 1119. Which OSI layer is associated with this rule? Is it OSI layer 1, 2, 3, 4, or 7? Let's see if you happen to know what this one is. This one should be 100% of you getting this one right. A security administrator has configured a firewall rule to block all traffic using TCP 1119. Which OSI layer is associated with this rule? See if you happen to know what this is. Is it layer 1, 2, 3, 4, or 7? This is just a review at this point. We went through OSI just a few minutes ago. Actually, not just a few minutes ago because that was prior to the outage. But before the outage, we went through this. But a lot's happened since then, hasn't it? The world has changed. We're now at a different connection. We are now working through another piece of this. And so let's see if we remember back prior to the horror that was the internet outage. Let's see if you know what this one happens to be. Your link to answer this one's right here on the screen, professormester.com/QA. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. We're going to see if we really know, if we really learned something from that very first performance-based question we ran into and working through this particular one. This is one where if you notice the differences here, you had a performance-based question with OSI. Now you have a multiple choice-based question with OSI. Notice they're effectively the same type of content. They're asking you about the same exam objectives. They're asking you about things that you should know based on those objectives. But just notice that the answers here and the question that's here is just asked in a different way. And so if you take anything away for performance-based questions or multiple choice, just know that everything comes from the exam objectives. Let's step through the answers here and see how you did. This question asks, a security administrator has configured a firewall rule to block all traffic using TCP 1119. Which OSI layer is associated with this rule? Is it layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, or layer 7? What did you answer? How did we do? Pretty close to 100%. 86% of you say it's OSI layer 4, the transport layer. And indeed, anything dealing with port numbers, TCP port numbers, or UDP port numbers, if anything about the question is asking you about a disposition based on a port number of any kind, it's OSI layer 4, the post office layer, because it's putting all of these different pieces of information, splitting them up, sending them across the network, and putting them back together again using TCP or using UDP. That's the two protocols most commonly associated with layer 4. It's not the only protocols that you might find at layer 4, but these days on our modern networks, it's pretty much always TCP or UDP. Very unusual to see anything else these days that you would work through. Hopefully that gives you some perspective. This is from my video in section 1.1, Understanding the OSI Model. It's a great one to go to if you're trying to understand more about the OSI models and what they work with. But layer 4, I think that's the absolute right answer. We don't even have to go through the other layers because we just did in the performance-based question we did earlier. 85% of you did a great job with this one. Well done on this question. We're going to do another question now. Let's skip ahead to something that's brand new, that's different than what we've gone through before. This question asks, a network configuration associates a user's desktop computer with the accounting VLAN. Where is this VLAN configuration defined? Is it on the connected switch port, under Settings, Status, Change Adapter Options, in the Windows Registry, in an A record in the DNS, or in the Active Directory database? It's got to be one of those, right? So if you think you know the answer, go to the links on your screen, professormester.com/QA, and lock in your answer. The question again asks, a network configuration associates a user's desktop computer with the accounting VLAN. Where is this VLAN configuration defined? Is it on the connected switch port, under Settings, Status, Change Adapter Options, in the Windows registry, in an A record in the DNS, or in the Active Directory database? All real things, all things you should probably be familiar with from your exam objectives, almost all of them anyway. And certainly the question is a topic that is clearly stated in the CompTIA exam objectives. If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA, lock in your answer right there on the screen. See how you do with that one. This should, I don't want to say this one's a gimme because VLANs are a very broad topic. I don't want to give away too much information here, but it's one that is important for you to know for the Network Plus. So make sure you're familiar with VLANs, familiar with how you configure a VLAN, where you configure a VLAN, the ideas of configuring VLANs, they're all in here. So make sure you're familiar with those as we step through them. This is another one that I think if you go through the exam objectives, these will be relatively straightforward when you get to the exam type. So this is one that I think most of us probably will get, but sometimes I don't know. I write the question and sometimes it goes a different direction what I'm expecting. I don't want to look at the answers, so I'm specifically not looking. I don't want to see. We're going to wait until you pull everything in there. And let's see how you did with this one. The question again asks, a network configuration associates a user's desktop computer with the accounting VLAN. Where is this VLAN configuration defined? Is it on the connected switch port, under Settings, Status, Change Adapter Options, in the Windows registry, in an A record in the DNS, or in the Active Directory database? Let's see how you did with this question. Let's show the results. And about 70% of you say on the connected switch port, 18% say in Settings, Status, Change Adapter Options, and then it drops to single digits. 7% said in the Active Directory database, 5% said in A record in the DNS, and 1% say in the Windows registry. So there's the key, is understanding where you would go to configure these. And that's the great thing about VLANs is we can configure a single physical switch to act as if it is multiple physical switches, effectively logically separating different interfaces on the switch to be on separate broadcast domains. So every interface on a switch is defined and configured to be a member of a particular VLAN. So by default, the switch will have a default VLAN that if you don't go in and configure it manually, the switch will tell you this by default. If you're not going to tell me what VLAN it is, I'm putting everybody into this default VLAN. Usually that's VLAN 1. So if you don't say any VLAN, everybody gets to be on VLAN 1. But you as the switch administrator would log into the switch. You would say, if you're on interface 5 on the switch, that's VLAN 7. If you're on interface 12, that's also VLAN 7. If you're on interface 1, you're actually in VLAN 12. So you have a big list of VLANs. You understand what all those VLANs are separating out, and you would configure the appropriate physical interface or even logical interface on that switch to be able to configure these and be very, very familiar with them. If you're somebody who's really working through understanding VLANs and where they would be associated, you need to understand you configure them very commonly in the switch itself. Different switches have different ways to configure those. You'll need to look at the configuration options for your switch to know exactly how to configure those interfaces together. And of course, if you look at the video and go into the details, we also talk about trunking. And when you get into trunking, you're dealing with tagging and untagging. But this question had nothing to do with trunking. It had nothing to do with tagging or untagging the connections that are there. And instead, this is a very good option, at least a very good thing to know if you're looking at a Network Plus exam. Where do you even configure these VLANs? You configure them on the switch. You don't have to know the details of how you configure them on the switch, but you know I can't change your VLAN unless I log into the switch and make that change on the switch itself. That is the right answer. And indeed, about 70% of you say, yep, it's on the connected switch port. That's a very good number if you're ever working through any problem that you're trying to resolve with VLANs. If you are in a Windows system, you could tell your Windows system that you want to change the VLAN of the adapter that's by default. That doesn't change the VLAN that's configured on the switch, however, and the VLAN on the switch is what determines what broadcast domain you happen to be a part of. So changing it on your device doesn't change anything as far as the switch is concerned. You also want to make the change in the DNS. Thankfully, we don't change the DNS to determine what VLAN you're a part of. We also don't make any changes in Active Directory to determine what VLAN you're a part of. And lastly, it's not the Windows registry either. The switch determines what VLAN you're a part of. The switch is the only thing that makes that determination. That's absolutely an important part of this. So if you are on the connected switch port and configuring that in the switch, you are in the right place to make that change. And about 70% of you say, yep, that's exactly where I would go to make that change and add somebody to the existing VLAN. You got that one absolutely correct. As many of you know, if you stepped through these before and you're working through the details of this exam, I have 93 videos in my Network Plus course. That's a pretty common number for a complete CompTIA course. A Plus is very similar. Security Plus is very different, but for the type of topics we're dealing with Network Plus, 93 videos. That's a lot of videos. It's over 14 hours of content. And I would hope that everybody would have time to go through every video, but I am a realist, and I understand not everybody has that kind of time. Sometimes people even skip over some of the videos. They already feel pretty comfortable with the topics. So what I wanted to do was give you a way to put all of the information from these videos into one document. And so I created my set of Network Plus course notes. This is the PDF of these course notes. I'm just going to flip through the different pages so you can see them. And it has everything that's in my videos in this single document. All of the text from the videos is in there. All of the important graphics that I've created, all of the charts and the tables, they are all in here. These are my course notes. They're broken out by video, so you can follow along with the videos. They're clearly marked: network types, WAN termination, virtual networks, provider links, etc., etc. So all of this is in the set of course notes. And if you like a physical version of course notes, we have that as well, of course. It's the same set of notes. It's the same fantastic display, the full color graphics, everything that you have in the digital version is also available in the physical version. And if you get the physical version, you also get the digital for free. So while you're waiting for me to ship this to you, I will have the digital version immediately available for you to download, all available on my website. If you'd like to be able to see those or learn more about them, they're all there. Go to professormesser.com/NPCN or Network Plus course notes. You can also download the course notes or have a look at those from the links that are on the website. Another fun thing to go through. If you're familiar or wanting to learn more about all of these different topics and what's available, that's where you would go, is to those links in the course notes, professormesser.com/NPCN. Let's do another question. I've got one. This question asks, which of the following uses a virtual IP to provide availability if a router fails? Is that RAID, 802.1x, VRRP, full duplex, or link aggregation? Which of the following uses a virtual IP to provide availability if a router fails? Is that RAID, 802.1x, VRRP, full duplex, or link aggregation? If you think you know the answer, follow the link that's on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. So we'll have to see if you happen to know what these are. All of these topics, by the way, from the exam objectives. So it could be any of them, but it's only one of them. Let's see if you know what these happen to be. It should be very good as you step through them to know what the different options are. And I'll also tell you, if you know the answer, you're locked in, you know 100% that's the answer, make sure you look at the other answers as well and you know what those are, because those topics are the ones that also could possibly appear on your Network Plus exam. Very, very important. So that's another piece of this, is understanding not just the right answers, but understanding why the wrong answers were wrong. And that's a good reason why we step through each one of those answers when we go through the explanation, so that you're not just clear on the question I was asking, but you're also clear on these other topics in case a question about those happens to appear on your exam. So that's important. Let's see if you are familiar with these. I'm letting a few more folks lock in their answers. No Googling. I can always tell when the answers are coming in quickly that we think we know what the answer is. And if it slows down, then we're not quite sure, sort of trying to figure it out. So on those, I like to give another few seconds for folks to lock in their answers and know exactly where the problem or the issue might be focused in on as you go through these questions. That's the real key. Let's see how you did with this one. Again, the question asked, which of the following uses a virtual IP to provide availability if a router fails? Is it RAID, 802.1x, VRRP, full duplex, or link aggregation? And let's see how you answered this one. The results say VRRP got 67% of the vote, so about 2/3 of you. 14% said 802.1x, 13% said link aggregation, so effectively a tie for second between those two. And we also have a tie for third place because 3% of you said RAID and 2% of you said full duplex. So this is something that's really remarkably common on very large enterprise type networks, is to have multiple devices so that if one device fails, we can now switch over or continue to use the secondary device, the redundant device that we've installed into the network. This involves a great deal of engineering, testing, configuration. These are not trivial configurations. You can imagine, how do you put two devices in place and somehow use both of those devices at the same time? There's some technical challenges associated with that. There's also we use one as a primary device, and if the primary device fails, it switches over to the secondary. There's also some technological challenges associated with that configuration. So it does take a lot of knowledge about how those configurations work and how you would properly engineer them to implement them onto your network. I spent a good part of my career as a systems engineer for a next generation firewall company. I have designed and implemented redundant firewall configurations almost 100% of the time. So after you do a number of them, you get very familiar with the different protocols, the different configurations, the different advantages and disadvantages of both, because there are significant advantages and disadvantages with both of those. But there's different ways to do this. One of the ways to do it is using a protocol called the first hop redundancy protocol, where your computer has a single default gateway. You've probably seen this when you've configured it. So you have to have availability. If you have a default gateway go away, you have to have some way to have something else take its place, and it's the first hop redundancy protocol that allows that. But perhaps the one that is a little more common, and certainly one that we were talking about with this particular question, is a protocol called the Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol, or VRRP, where instead of you having a default gateway pointing to a physical or even logical IP address on that router, instead you point your default gateway to a virtual IP. And if that first device fails, that virtual IP effectively moves over to another device. It becomes active on a secondary router. And now you're continuing to use the same IP address, but now that IP address has been moved to a different device automatically behind the scenes. And that's a perfect way to maintain uptime and availability if you happen to lose one of those routers. This is one of those significant challenges with IPv4, is making something like this work. And we introduce these types of protocols to get around some of those shortcomings that were not implemented into the standard of TCP/IP, especially when you're dealing with a single default gateway. That means you have a single place where everything can fail. And these protocols allow you to add multiple connections so that you don't have that single place where you might have downtime. VRRP, the virtual router redundancy protocol, is what we were looking for. 67% of you got that one absolutely correct. Well done. We also have 13% of you that mentioned 802.1x. That is a method for authentication, especially when trying to authenticate using a standard database of authentication credentials. That doesn't have anything to do with virtual IPs or routers failing, so 802.1x is not going to work there either. We've also got link aggregation. 13% of you said link aggregation. Link aggregation is great for creating redundant links that are available at the same time. So you effectively can plug in multiple links and use all of those links as if they are one very large pipe. That's very nice when you want to move a lot of data, but has nothing to do with virtual IPs or availability if a router fails. We also have connections. 3% of you said RAID. RAID is the redundant array of inexpensive or independent disks, depending on when you were born, I guess. 3% of you said RAID. RAID is a great way to maintain uptime and availability if you lose a hard drive. The hard drive was to fail. But in this case, it's a router that's failing. The virtual IP on the router is what we're trying to maintain. And RAID has nothing to do with virtual IPs, has nothing to do with routers. Most routers don't even have a hard drive inside of them, or some type of storage drive that they have is something very small. There's not really redundancy associated with those drives commonly. And then full duplex. 3% of you said full duplex. Full duplex is a way to communicate across the network where you can both receive and send traffic at the same time. That's a great way, a very efficient way to transfer data. Has nothing to do with virtual IPs, has nothing to do with availability if a router happens to fail. The only option here that makes any sense, and many of you in the chat room even mentioned, if you can do a method of elimination, go through each one of these. You know it's not RAID, you know it's not 802.1x, you know it's not full duplex, and you know it's not link aggregation, and you may not even know what VRRP is, but you know it can't be any of the others. We hit the button on answer C. 67% of you got that one right. It is indeed VRRP. Let's keep this going. I've got more questions for you. Let's do another one for Network Plus. This next question, it is asking, a company web server has become unresponsive and a check of the internet link shows excessive bandwidth use. Which of the following would best categorize this event? Is it DOS, phishing, on-path attack, deauthentication, or rogue services? A company web server has become unresponsive, and a check of the internet link shows excessive bandwidth use. Which of the following would best categorize this event? Is it DOS, phishing, on-path, deauthentication, or rogue services? If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. This is one that can be a significant problem in large environments, especially for those of you that are trying to keep those websites up and running. That's why a number of people, if you look at the Professor Messer website, we have systems and processes behind the scenes to prevent these types of things from happening. So let's see if you're familiar with what these happen to be. If we're somebody who's trying to break down and understand more about these kinds of problems, you not only need to know which answer is correct, but all of the others as well. And this is only a subset of all of the different security challenges you might have associated with this. So make sure you step through all of this and become familiar with what the different options might be. Even if you know the answer on this one, again, go to the rest of the answers and make sure you're familiar with how those might manifest themselves as well. Sometimes problems like this might look like one thing, but turn out to be something completely different. So make sure you step through each of those answers so you're absolutely sure that you know what these might actually be. So be sure to step through and as you go through them, make sure you're really, really familiar with all of these. Problems we had today had nothing to do with excessive bandwidth use, fortunately. Our problems were related to congestion on the network, probably an outage or an issue with a redundant connection, but same type of issue. If you're down, you're down. But why were you down? So you have to be able to step through each one of these and really understand the core problem, because only then are you able to address it and resolve it. You don't want to pick the wrong problem, go down that road, then realize nothing I'm doing is helping because that wasn't the issue we ran into. Let's see how you did with this one. The question again asks, a company web server has become unresponsive and a check of the internet link shows excessive bandwidth use. Which of the following would best categorize this event? Would it be DOS, phishing, on-path attack, deauthentication, or rogue services? We really don't have much information to go on with this particular question, so we really do have to pick which one would best categorize this event. I think this is something people get a little hung up on, is that they want the answer to be very clear and very obvious. But in all things technology, the answer is rarely very clear and rarely very obvious. But you do have a number of options to choose from here. We've narrowed it down to 5 things. Which of these 5 things could it most likely be associated with? That's what we're really looking for. Would it be 100% that's the problem? Well, we don't know yet, but that wasn't the question. The question said, which of the following would best categorize this event? And if you're somebody who is working through a problem like this, that is an unresponsive server, and you're seeing excessive bandwidth use, then you're probably suffering from a denial of service, where there is so much traffic. Whether that traffic is legitimate or not legitimate is a different set of questions, but we're having so much traffic come in that we are overwhelming the capabilities of that particular service, and that service is suddenly no longer available to us. That's the problem. So this could be a design failure, it could be an engineering failure. We didn't think we would be getting this much traffic, but we did. Or it could be that someone's directly attacking that particular server. So that's another important one as well. Make sure you're really familiar with the options available there. Ultimately, the system is unavailable, regardless of what happens with those. So make sure that you are very, very familiar with how these particular problems manifest themselves. They could easily show up on the exam, very similar to the question that we had here and the one we were working on. And again, this doesn't have to be a complicated denial of service. One type of denial of service is you walk up to the server and you turn it off. That is a denial of service. You just denied that service for anyone else who needed access to that device. So that's why I tell folks, don't worry about complicated botnets and people trying to manage or sell different denial of service options. Is it distributed denial of service versus a regular denial of service? Don't complicate things. If the issue is that the service is no longer available, then the service is being denied. It is indeed, by definition, a denial of service. That's what we would run into. And in fact, in this case, that's exactly what we wanted to see, is that on the results, 90% of you chose denial of service. That's the piece that is really best describing this particular event and what it would be. Now, why wouldn't it be one of these others? 7% of you said an on-path attack. On-path attacks commonly get into the middle of a link to either monitor the traffic going back and forth or change some of the traffic going back and forth. Technically, on-path attacks could possibly or potentially create a denial of service situation, but very, very rarely it would have to be something very intentional. So on-path is not commonly associated with an attack of this type. It's certainly, given the other options, not the best way to categorize this. So that's what I mean by the actual exam, is that you could make an argument that an on-path attack could possibly be used to create this exact scenario. And you'd be absolutely correct. You could create a scenario where on-path attack would be causing this. But because it is so unusual and so rare for on-path attacks to be used for this, and to be quite honest, unnecessary for a denial of service, you don't need on-path. On-path attack is a very complex attack relative to denial of service. It's much easier to do a denial of service when you're working through it without having any type of on-path attack. So that, although feasible, would not fit our category of being the best categorization of this attempt. We've got 2% that say rogue services. Somebody may have turned on a rogue service, but that would not create an overwhelming amount of traffic to an existing legitimate service. So not the one we were looking for. So we've got 1% that said phishing. This didn't ask us for any of our private information. It didn't ask us for a password or a phone number or anything else. So phishing doesn't really qualify here. And deauthentication is a wireless attack that drops people off of the wireless network. There's no mention here of a wireless network. There's no mention of people dropping off of the wireless network. It clearly tells us that it's a web server, it's unresponsive, and we have excessive bandwidth use. That's a perfect description of a denial of service. That's exactly what we were looking for. Hopefully, that's the answer you chose as well. Answer A, denial of service. 90% of you got that one absolutely correct. Well, I know we're coming up on about an hour of Q&A minus the amount of time that we spent troubleshooting our network connectivity and waiting for that to come back. But I do want to give you one more question. Since you stuck around this long, I think you deserve another question. So let's do another one that's on our list. Here is a question, maybe you're familiar with this technology, that asks, which of the following would be the most likely use of a rollover cable? Would that be to provide hardware diagnostics on a router's serial interface? Would it be used to connect two Ethernet laptops without a switch? Would it be to deliver PoE to a remote, and it should say access point, not account point, connect to a management port, or would we use a rollover cable to install in a circulating airspace? So minus the spelling errors that I put into this, I'm at fault. This is not anyone else. I'm the one who wrote everything down wrong. The question again asks, which of the following would be the most likely use of a rollover cable? Would it be hardware diagnostics on a router's serial interface? Would it be connect to Ethernet laptops without a switch? Would it be deliver PoE to a remote access point, not account point? Would it be to connect to a management port, or would it be to install in a circulating airspace? If you think you know the answer, use the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your answer. See if you're familiar with when you would use this rollover cable, and you'd be able to put it into the network. I'm not even going to tell you. I'm not even going to tell you how you would make something like this work for you. Be very familiar with these. So I'm going to be quiet. No hints in the chat room. No answers in the chat room, please. Instead, you want to lock in your answer by following that link. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See if you are familiar with rollover cables and when you might use them. I have a rollover cable in my bag or in my closet. I certainly have one around here somewhere that I might want to use. So when would I use it? How could I use it? In what context would it be used? We have to know a lot of different kinds of cables on the exam. This is one of them. This is one of those many. So make sure you're familiar with them. And I'm going to show you. Yes, some people said, can you show you a rollover cable? I will sort of show you a rollover cable in just a moment once we get through this one. A number of you have locked in your answer. Let's see how you did. The question again asks, which of the following would be the most likely use of a rollover cable? Is it hardware diagnostics on a router's serial interface? Is it connect to Ethernet laptops without a switch? Is it deliver PoE to a remote access point? Is it connect to a management port? Or is it install in a circulating airspace? Let's see how you answered this one. Show the results. And we're not sure. We did not get a majority on this one. 39% is the plurality of you that answered this one. And it is connect to a management port is where most of you answered with 39%. 29% said hardware diagnostics on a router's serial interface. 28% say connect to Ethernet laptops without a switch. 3% say deliver PoE to a remote access point. And 1% said install in a circulating airspace. So if you had to use a rollover cable, you would be using a cable that looks something like this. That is a rollover pinout. So if you ever look at maybe a crossover cable, which is a different kind of cable, you know that pin 1 goes to pin 3, pin 3 goes to pin 1, pin 2 goes to pin 6. You have different options available on your cable to be able to configure it as a crossover cable. And we have different types of crossover cables, obviously, for 100 megabit and 10 megabit versus gigabit, for example. But this is a rollover cable. And notice pin 1 does not connect to pin 1. Pin 1 connects to pin 8, pin 2 to 7, pin 3 to 6, pin 4 to 5, and so on. So it's almost exactly opposite between one side and the other. So this would not be a patch cable. In some cases, you'll hear people call this a rolled cable. They'll call it a Yoast cable because this style and design was proposed by a gentleman named Dave Yoast. But most of the time, we refer to this as a Cisco console cable. That's the one that we would be using in this case, is a Cisco console cable. That's what we would break down and try to get a familiarity with. If you were plugging in, and this is almost exclusively on Cisco devices, very few manufacturers ended up using rollover cables for something like this. But it is a relatively common standard for older Cisco switches and older Cisco routers. These days, there's just a USB interface on those devices. Or in really old devices, it might be a serial connection like a DB9 connection on those. But they are rollover cables is where they would be used, commonly with the management interface or console interface on one of these devices. That's why I often tell people, if you're going to be working with a console or an interface on these devices, make sure you know what kind of cable they need. Some of them need a USB cable. Some of them need a rollover cable. Some of them need a null modem cable, which is a different set of pinouts, and almost none of them use Ethernet. They're all serial connections. So that is where that came from, is this rollover cable. It's sort of a Cisco thing. You don't see them as much any longer in use. We've almost moved everything over to USB. But if you run into some older switches or older routers, and there are plenty of them out there, your older switch or older router could possibly use a rollover cable. What we end up doing as technicians is we have in our box of goodies, in our bag that we take along with us, we have straight through cables. And what we'll commonly do is we'll create an adapter. You can create your own. You can use your crimper and create your own types of cables that take the straight through and turn it into a rollover. And then I'll take a straight through and turn it into a crossover. And they'll take a straight through and turn it into a loop back. And I can simply use the same or any type of patch cable, which is wired 1-to-1, and simply put on the adapter on the end of it that turns it into a different type of cable. So if you run into a technician and you say, what do you use for a rollover? They go, oh, I have an adapter for that. Or I have a separate cable. Maybe it's really not common to have separate cables for all of these, because if you're on the road and you're moving from device to device and you're a field technician, you want to carry as little as possible. So it's very common to use a standard patch cable and then use an interface on the end of that to connect all those together. Those are indeed used to connect to a management or console port of a device. You would never see a rollover cable used in any other context. They're just not used. It's a very simplistic cable, so it makes sense that you would want to use something like this so that you don't have to worry about what kind of cable you have. But in reality, in practical use, we pretty much ended up carrying around a lot of different cables anyway. And the idea was, if we're carrying all these cables anyway, why are we adding another one to the mix? And of course, these days we just plug in USB. That's our serial connection for anything. That's why for 29% of you that chose hardware diagnostics on a router's serial interface, that's a loop back cable. So already you've got 3 cable types that sound like the same thing. You got a rollover cable, you got a crossover cable, you got a loop back cable. 3 different cable types, 3 different pinouts, used for 3 completely different things. Make sure you're familiar with all 3 of those, certainly at a minimum. We also have connect 2 Ethernet laptops without a switch. That's a crossover cable. That's where you would fit the crossover cable into all of these. And we have 3% that said deliver PoE to a remote access point. That could be a very common straight through cable. We call them patch cables or straight through cables because it's pin 1 to pin 1, pin 2 to pin 2, pin 3 to pin 3, and so on. So that's not what we would choose for a rollover cable. Rollover cables are not used to deliver power over Ethernet to a remote access point. They're just using the same Ethernet connection. And then lastly, we have install in a circulating airspace. The circulating airspace, certainly the one above the ceiling, is the plenum. And what we would want to put into the plenum is a plenum rated cable. That describes how the cable is constructed. It does not describe the pinouts for that cable. A plenum rated cable could be a loopback. It could be a rollover. It could be a straight through. It could be a crossover. The idea behind a plenum rated cable is it's constructed with materials that are very difficult to have or will not have a lot of toxic smoke or anything if fire happens to hit that particular cable. And that's why you put it in the airspace, because you don't want a lot of smoke in the airspace. So that's the examples we would use. For the purposes of a rollover cable, though, the only option on this list for rollover is indeed option D, connecting to a management port. That's almost exclusively what you would do with a rollover cable, and that indeed is the correct answer. Exactly what you would be choosing. Everything that we've talked about today comes directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. Make sure you are familiar with these objectives. They are incredible. They have everything inside of them. I think I have a copy of the objectives here on the screen. There it is. This is a PDF of everything you need to know for the exam. This is not a summary of everything you need to know. This is not a breakdown of some of the information you need to know. This is everything. So for example, Section 1.1, compare and contrast the open systems interconnection OSI model layers and the encapsulation concepts. So we need to know the OSI model layer 1 through layer 7, physical through application. We also have to know data encapsulation and decapsulation within the OSI model context, and understanding things like an Ethernet header, an IP header, a TCP or UDP header, TCP flags, a payload, and a maximum transmission unit. So already just in section 1.1 is a ton of information we need to know. Oh, wait, there's more. Let's go to section 1.2, where we have to explain the characteristics of network topologies and network types. All of these bullets are something you should know, as well as section 1.3, 1.4 through 1.8. Now we're in section 2, domain number 2, where we have all of these bullets you need to know. Section 3, all of those bullets. Section 4, all of those bullets. And section 5 for troubleshooting. This is a lot of information. There's a lot of content here. Of course, all of my videos contain every single one of these bullets. I use these exam objectives to create the videos. So you can follow along with the videos, you can follow along with the course notes, and follow along with the objectives to check off everything you need to know for the exam. And if you don't know one of these bullets that's here, that's what you should study. And when people ask me, when do I know when I'm ready to take my exam? Well, you go back to this list, and if you can check off everything in this list, you're ready to take your exam. You can get a copy of these objectives. They are free from CompTIA. I have a link over to the CompTIA website at professormesser.com/objectives, or go to your favorite search engine, type in CompTIA exam objectives, take you right to the objectives page. Make sure you download those. That's where you want to go. We do one of these study groups every month. You can, of course, go to my calendar. It's on my website, professormesser.com/calendar, to know when the next event is going to be. If you were here last week, you will also notice that these dates have changed. This is different than what I talked about last week. That sometimes happens. So that's why I always tell you, regardless of what you see in this live stream, always go back and check the calendar to know when the next event is going to be. Now, the next Network Plus study group is going to be in May, on May the 17th. There's the link right there. I do A Plus study groups the week before that on the 9th and the 11th. There's a Security Plus study group on the 24th. Since we're talking Network Plus here, that's the Network Plus we're going to deal with on the 17th. That date might change again. So I always tell people, make sure you keep checking the calendar. Not only do I have it on my website at the link you see here, if you're already part of my Discord, there's a separate channel for events. And so check the events channel to know when the next events might be. I keep both of those updated all the time. So if anything changes, those will be the first two places to change. You'll know immediately if something is being updated, changed, or being modified. It's all right there to work for you. Well, that brings us to the end of the first part of our study group today. But I'm opening up the chat room for questions in just a moment. Stick around for that. Don't forget about our Success Bundle. Go to professormesser.com/netsuccess. We also, of course, have all of our discounted vouchers available if you're in the U.S., Canada, or U.S. territories. Go to professormesser.com/vouchers. And, of course, we have lots of places where you can follow us online. Simply type in professormesser.com/YouTube/Twitter/Instagram/Discord/ anything else, where you think might be, /LinkedIn. There's another good example. So if you're trying to find me, that's a good way to find me online. If you don't know where we are, simply join our Discord at professormesser.com/Discord, and you can ask me. I'll be glad to answer you and have all of those available as well. Well, that brings us to the end of at least the first part of our study group. Stick around for the after show. I'll take your questions from the chat room. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sticking in all the way to the end with all of those network problems we had earlier. We sure appreciate you being here. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. Okay. Now the part of the study group. Well, that was abrupt. How do you like that cut? We just cut right there. So there we are. That's a good way to start the study group, the after show part of the study group. This is our after show. This is the part of the study group where I will take questions from the chat room. So instead of me asking the questions of you, you can now ask questions of me. So if you have questions, you can go to the chat room. The chat room that's there is available on YouTube. We also have a chat room available on my website at professormesser.com/live. If you are there on the website, it's the same chat. I'm watching that same chat go by. That's the same chat we've been talking about this whole time. That's the chat that allows me to see what questions you might have and the things that you are doing in the chat. So feel free to have a look at those. It's a great place to go to find out more information about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and the other things that are there. Before we get into questions that you have, just put them into the chat. I'll be sort of going through the different parts of the chat and breaking them down. I will be glad to do all of that. I wanted to find some of the questions that came up earlier and the things that we had there. One of the things that I saw come up was from Ryan that said, $5 super chat. Ryan said, passed my Network Plus yesterday with a 766 thanks to your videos on the Security Plus. Very grateful for your help. Congratulations, Ryan. More than happy to help. Glad we were able to have some small part in you passing your Network Plus exam. Great score. And I think you'll find the Security Plus is another, it's a tough one, but a great certification to have in your pocket. So have a look at there's your Security Plus. We wish you the best with your studies there. And if you have questions about that, we have our Security Plus study groups. We'd love for you to join us on there as well. We've also got other super chats that have come through. I saw at least 2 others. So if you guys will bear with me just a moment, I have to find these in my chat. I think there was one just above Ryan's, and I don't want to miss any of them. Looks like my chat, I ran out of chat. The chat no longer goes back that far. I think there was someone else, and I will find it and mention it in just a bit. In the meantime, I can tell you about Jamie and his $50 super chat. Jamie says, I passed the Security Plus exam on Tuesday. Great content. Thank you, sir. You're very welcome, Jamie. Thank you so much for the super chat and for your support and the $50 super chat on top of that. Congratulations on your new Security Plus certification as well. I'm glad the content was able to help. I always say that I had just a small part in this. You're the one that has to go take the exam. So really all of this is about you. Congratulations on your new Security Plus, and thank you so much for your support with the super chats as well. It's a great way to support what we do here. And all of that, by the way, goes right back to other folks who are studying for their exams. And I do want to absolutely help in any way that I can with the things you're doing there. So congratulations again on your Security Plus. So let's go through some of the questions that you have in the chat room. I want to sort of break down other questions that are here. Oh, and with all the things that were going on, Scott was not wrong. Did you miss the CEU section? You didn't miss it at all because I didn't tell you what it said. I didn't give you a CEU. So for those of you sticking in this whole time, I would love to tell you how you could get an email from me that gives you a certification that you were here to earn a 1-hour webinar category CEU. The way that you would do that is go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. You would click the Contact Us link. In the Contact Us link, I'd like you to put your name, your email address. In the subject line, I would like you to put that this is the April 2023 Network Plus. Having that Network Plus there is going to help me quite a bit. And then in the body of the message on a line by itself, put the super secret code words of the month, rollover cable. Rollover cable is the super secret code words of the month. That's what you want to put into the body of the message. If you want to put anything else in that message, you're more than welcome to. Just go down a couple of lines and you're welcome to put those in. I read through everything you put in there, whether it's good or bad. I read through all of it. Most of it's good. And I'm glad to read through those. I do like getting the messages from you folks, and I go through those whenever I start processing them. So it takes me about a week to get through and process all of those. Sometimes I do it on the weekends, so this one might be a little bit faster, but it's a good way for you to receive an email from me. It'll be digitally signed that says you earned 1 hour of a webinar category CEU. Again, I can only give you that CEU if you follow these directions. If I receive an email in any other form, it does not qualify for the CEU. You go to the top or the bottom of the website, click Contact Us, put your name, your email in the subject line, put April 2023 Network Plus, and then the body of the message, put the super secret code words of the month, rollover cable. Rollover cable, super secret code words of the month. Thank you, Scott, for reminding me about that because I'll just forget. Well, we'll never have one. But you guys are right on it. Thank you so much for letting me know that those are there. This is a pretty good question because it sort of speaks to the exam. Ryan asks, what gives people the most issues on the exam? And it's sort of all over the place. Network Plus is a very broad exam. We're talking about cables and Ethernet standards. We talk about troubleshooting and TDRs, and there's a little security in there. There's just so much you have to know across so many different topics. But I think a lot of people get worried about subnetting. That's probably the number one topic that I receive about questions for this exam is subnetting. And indeed, if you've never done IP subnetting before, it can be a bit of a challenge to wrap your head around and try to figure out what are they trying to do with subnetting? How does this work? And there's a lot of different shortcuts and a lot of different ways to do subnetting, but you have to understand what you're doing with subnetting first. Subnetting is really about just cutting a pie into even slices most of the time. But that's the challenging part for a lot of folks because there's a little bit of binary math there, or there's a shortcut that gets you around the binary math, but then you have to learn the shortcut. And at the end of the day, as much as I hate using the term at the end of the day, it applies here. At the end of the day, it may be that you find that the idea of subnetting is not as broad on this exam as you might have first thought. A lot of people spend weeks going through subnetting only to find on their exam they got maybe one question that had anything to do with subnetting, and it was much easier than what they thought it was going to be. Some people have said, and probably they're going outside the scope of their candidate agreement, but I have received emails where people told me, I got no subnetting questions on the exam. So it's a case where you don't want to spend too much time on a particular topic, but you do want to spend the right amount of time on the topic. So I wanted to show you, let's go back to our exam objectives. There they are. There's our exam objectives. I'm in section 1, networking fundamentals. There is a section on networking fundamentals that says, given a scenario, configure a subnet and use appropriate IP addressing schemes. So it goes through the ideas of RFC 1918 for public and private IP addresses, NAT and PAT. PAT, of course, is just a type of NAT. Then we've got IPv4 versus IPv6. And then finally, IPv4 subnetting, both classless, which is what we use today, and classful, which is what the internet originally used, and why we still talk about them. I describe why we still talk about classful in the videos themselves. So in the Network Plus exam objectives under section 1.4, one of the topics in section 1.4 is IPv4 subnetting. So you've got a lot of other topics in section 1.4, In section 1, in domain 1, there are 8 different sections. 1.4 happens to be one of those. And on the total exam, there are 5 different domains, each one of them with multiple subdomains within them. And that's why I tell people don't spend a whole lot of time on IP subnetting, especially if you're not getting it, because it's this tiny little section that is in the exam objectives, and it has it. And indeed, you might get a question on subnetting. You might get 2. In an extreme case, maybe you get 3, but you might not get any. And that's why, is because it's such a small part of the exam. So I tell people all the time, don't worry so much about subnetting. That's their biggest issue on the exam. Don't worry about subnetting. If you have gone through it and you spent a week and you're just not getting it, I have told people in the past, and I will continue to tell them this, just ignore it. It's not great advice, admittedly, but it's all about time and how much effort you want to put into this. There are a lot of other topics you could have studied during that week on Network Plus that you would now have down cold, but you didn't spend time doing that. You spent time on subnetting. But in reality, you might get a question on subnetting. You might not get any. Was it worth that amount of time to take away from the other topics? Maybe not. So if anything, I will tell people, don't not study for something, because I get a lot of people sending me mail about that one. But I tell people, spend the appropriate amount of time studying for subnetting. And at some point, you're going to have to decide to move on if you aren't quite capturing the nuances. So I think that's an important consideration, because you could spend a lot of time on subnetting, not get it, and then you walk into the exam and you get a lot of questions about TDRs and cable types. And you're wondering, why didn't I study TDRs? Why didn't I study cable types? Well, because you were studying subnetting, and probably a little bit too much. So that's why I tell people, don't worry about the specifics. Worry about the relativity between these different topics and how they might appear. And I would very much like to focus in on where you would see the different topics and how much you might see them on the exam. So that's probably the number one. Question on the exam, or question here, can I clarify the pinouts for a crossover cable? I'm seeing conflicting info from what you have in your course material, seeing it as A/B instead of A/unique like you have. So we're already conflating different technologies into one single sentence, and that ultimately is the problem with crossover cables and how other places on the internet may describe crossover cables. A crossover cable is defined by the IEEE in the 802.3 Ethernet standards. It's a very well-defined standards. They give you the pinouts in the IEEE standards. And by the way, if you are a student, and you are, the IEEE standards for 802.3 are available for you to download for free from the IEEE. You don't have to pay for them like everybody else does. If you're a manufacturer and you're creating Ethernet products, you have to buy those standards. If you're a student, like you are, you can download them for free. And I have, and I've read them. And those standards give you the pinouts for a crossover cable for 1000 base T, for 100 base TX, for 10 base T. So you know exactly what the pinouts might be. And if you look at my courses show you exactly the pinouts specified by the IEEE in the 802.3 standards. Nobody else gets to define what a crossover cable is except the IEEE as part of the 802.3 standards and the Ethernet standards within each of those. I think I might even have some graphics from the Ethernet standards that I think I can show here in context. So give me a moment. I was not ready for your question. So let's do this one. Do I have a good image of this? I really don't. But this is a pretty good one to show. I think that at least give you a perspective of how do we know what these pinouts are? Well, in the standard, the pinouts are associated with these bidirectional communication. As I mentioned in my course, when you get to gigabit Ethernet for most commonly 1000 base T. So if you're plugging in a gig Ethernet connection, those are sending and receiving signals across the same wire at the same time between both devices. I know, Ethernet's crazy that way. It's really remarkable what they're able to do. So the pinouts for this, it's table 40-12 from the, I think this is the most current set of 802.3 standards in the 1000 base T section of the exam. That's where the table 40-12 comes from. Tells you the exact pinouts between all of these. And you'll notice it goes through all 8 of these different interfaces, all 8 pins within the Ethernet cable. And notice they are very different. If you were to write them out in colorful designs like I did in my videos, you will notice that they are not the same as having 568A pinouts on one side and 568B pinouts on the other side. Why are they different? Well, that's because the folks over at the EIA that manage pinouts give you information. Here, for instance, is the pinout. This is what you would find in the 568 standard. It just lists out, here's what colors go in these pins. The 568 standard has nothing to do with crossover cables because it's not determining how Ethernet works. The 568 standards are about how do you put wire in a wall? How do you run wire from one device to the other? And what colors should you put on each one of those pins? Here's the 568B, for example. Similar thing, just different colors. Has nothing to do with crossover. So anytime someone tries to describe to you a crossover cable in terms of the EIA 568 standard, you can stop them right there and go, wait a second, crossover cables aren't even defined in the 568 standard. Why are you referring to them? They have nothing to do with Ethernet. They have everything to do with colors of cables. And we're not talking about colors of cables, we're talking about crossover cables. So that's why I always tell people, go back to the Ethernet standard, and what you will find is that a 1000 base T crossover cable is not the same as 568 colors on one side and 568B colors on the other side. You'll know, and you know that because if you put together the crossover like it's described in the standard, it's not the same. Physically, they are different. You can visually see that they're not the same thing. So that's why there's confusion, I think, because so many people through the years have defined a crossover cable as A colors on one side and B colors on the other. But in reality, that's not the case when you get to gigabit Ethernet, and that's where that particular description falls apart. It's not correct. It's not accurate. It's wrong, in fact. It's completely inaccurate. It's not even close to being accurate because IEEE gets to make that decision. And that's why I tell people, if you're worried about crossover, go back to the standard. Don't trust me. Don't trust a third-party website. Don't listen to anyone else. Go back to the standard. Tell me what the standard says and see if I got it right or if I got it wrong. That's where you should go. So always, always, always go back to the standard. That's sort of a watchword in technology in general. If there's ever a question about, is this working the way it should be working, the answer should always be, let's go look at the standard. And as long as we all follow the standard, everything should work just fine. Not everybody always follows the standard, however. That's your challenge. That's the problem. So that's why that particular description is not just wrong technically, it's wrong functionally. It's a wrong way to describe crossover cables. You don't describe crossover cables as certain colors are on one side and certain colors are on the other. The people who define the colors have nothing to do with Ethernet. So go to the people that define Ethernet, and I think we're fine. I think you'll be good. Other questions? Let's go back to the chat and see what other folks have been talking about. Other questions. So this is a pretty good perspective of these, and I think a lot of folks. I don't want to call out anybody in the chat room, so I'm gonna keep sort of talking about the other pieces of this. A lot of folks in the chat room are talking about port numbers, and I think that's a really good thing to talk about. Let's talk about it right now. This gets people sort of wrapped around the axle too, is that if you go to section 1.5 of the exam objectives, there's a lot of port numbers here. But all of them you will effectively run into and more in your career. So especially for configuring firewalls, for being more familiar with how to set up and get services running on a device, you will constantly be running across situations where a certain piece of traffic is not able to get between point A and point B. And the question is going to come up, why is this traffic getting filtered? Is there a firewall in the middle? Oh, there is a firewall in the middle. What port numbers are allowed, or what applications are allowed by that firewall? How are we able to get traffic through that device? And do we need to talk to the firewall owner to be able to enable our application to work properly over that link? Well, the first question that the firewall owner is going to ask you is, what application is it, and what port numbers is that application using? Sometimes it's a relatively obvious answer, and you can find it in this list. Oh, we're using HTTP, which uses port 80, and we're using HTTPS, which uses port 443. There it is, 443 right there for HTTPS. Those are the two we're running for this application. And then they can say, okay, we'll set up a firewall rule that will allow those two ports to pass through this firewall. And maybe we'll put some specific IP addresses on it, or maybe we'll associate an application with those particular port numbers. So it limits not only the port numbers, but also the application using those port numbers, which our modern firewalls can do very easily. So that's why these port numbers are so important, because you will get a bunch of people together trying to solve a network connectivity problem. And the question they're going to ask is, let's break this problem down to its core pieces. What application is it? What port numbers is it using? And you need to know that. Sometimes applications are very simple, 1 or 2 port numbers. Sometimes the application uses 6 or 7 different port numbers, and you need to know every single one of those. Sometimes the owner or the writer, the developer of the application won't tell you what port numbers the application is using, and they will tell you, to get this application working, you need to enable all port numbers. Quite literally in the release notes of so many different applications, I've seen it over and over and over again. So I often tell people, if you see that, if you see an application developer saying, I'll just open up everything, that's the only way we will support the application, then you're going to have to do some more work. You're going to have somebody run the application. You're going to need to capture that traffic, and you're going to have to make the determination of what port numbers that application actually uses, because you should never, 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 never enable all port numbers through a firewall. Ever. Never, ever. Don't do that. You will have a lot of people, especially if you take Security Plus and you become a security administrator, there will be pressure on you to simply turn it on, enable it so we can get this application working. Why are you holding us up? Why are you creating the bottleneck for this? You're always telling us no. That's a very common thing for security professionals. But you kind of get used to that after a while, and I say, I'm telling you no, because that is a horrible idea. It puts us at extreme risk. And if we're going to do something like that, I'm going to document this information, put it all the way up the chain, and make sure that every manager who is responsible for this data all the way up signs off on this. And I think that's reasonable for you as a security professional to say, this is remarkably risky, and we're going to need to make sure everybody's aware and fine with this, because once you make a dramatic open hole in your firewall like that, the bad guys and attackers will easily find it, and they will exploit it. So you don't need to be the one holding the bag when suddenly the network is breached. You can say, I told you so. I warned you about this. And because it was such an egregious type of request, I made sure that every piece of management of this company was aware of this problem, and they approved it. And I have no problem doing that as a security professional, because if you're working with a good team, they will already know, oh, you're asking me this question again, which means I should say no. Because the people at the higher levels may not be technically knowledgeable, but they do understand opening port numbers. That's not a difficult concept for most managers in an organization. So you want to put them being responsible for the inevitable breach. In fact, that may be a good way to describe it. By signing here, you will be responsible for the inevitable breach that will occur when we open up all these port numbers of the firewall. Thank you so much for your time. Make them think for a second before they sign off on that. That will be a challenge, and being able to work through it. So that's why I think whenever you get into these scenarios where You've been asked to make such a dramatic change to the network that you need to be prepared for this. Anytime you're in this environment, you aren't just working with technology and systems and routers and switches and all of these other devices. You're working with people to implement a technical solution to a set of challenges they have. And sometimes we want to set up a web server and make our services available on the internet. We want to transfer files between point A and point B, and we want to do it securely. Or we want to have a VPN that everyone can access when they're at home to gain access to services that are on our internal network. These are just normal, everyday requests made by other people you work with to implement some type of technology. They don't know how to install a VPN. They don't know how to configure a firewall, but you do. So you have to somehow be the translator. I often refer to these as you're the universal translator between what the business or organization wants to accomplish and what it takes technically to make that happen. And you're the one that has to engineer the solution and put that in place. And you certainly don't want to do that in a way that's going to create more of a security issue for the company, and that's why you have to learn port numbers. It's such a long story to say, here's why we're doing this, but that really is why we're doing this. You have to be very familiar with that. These are not the only port numbers you'll ever run into. They're the most important ones you need to know, but after a while, you start using them, it just becomes second nature to know that port 22 is SSH and port 80 is HTTP and 3389 is remote desktop because you're just doing it all the time. You're using those port numbers. It's very common to see that on a packet capture. It's very common to see that in your firewall configuration, and it just becomes second nature. But in the meantime, as you're learning Network Plus, it's more rote memorization, it seems. So I always tell folks that if you're working through this, I think that can help you as well. You just need to step through all of this and become familiar with everything that's listed on that. So make sure you're familiar with those too. Other questions that have come through. This is sort of a background question, but I will accept it. Let's play. Thanks for being here. Let's play. The question asked, before YouTube, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, did you used to teach IT? I think all of us, to some degree, become instructors of technology. In fact, if you look at the Security Plus exam or even the A Plus exam, there's a section about removing malware. And there's also a section in Security Plus about security policies and other things we would do. But there's one of the last bullets when you're removing malware or when you are documenting a change to the network is you communicate that change to others, or you talk to the end user about how to avoid getting that malware in the future. There is a one-on-one or perhaps even a group training session, and I've seen this every place I've ever worked had folks that were in IT that would do a lunch and learn, a brown bag scenario, or they block out an hour sometime during the day to do a webinar or to create videos on demand to explain to everybody in the organization how we're handling these situations. So everyone in IT does some type of training. It's just very common to run into that type of scenario. So in my particular example, I, of course, I was in positions throughout my career where I was doing a lot of training like that to an end user. One of the first corporate gigs for corporate jobs I got was working in a service desk. We didn't call it a help desk. It was better than a help desk. It was a service desk because calling it a service desk made it sound so much better. But I worked in the help desk of a corporation, of an insurance company. And part of that job was that we would also have to do training on different technologies. So people in the organization needed to learn how to use a spreadsheet. I would do a class on how to use this spreadsheet. Other people wanted how to use this particular networking function. I would teach how to use that particular networking function. It was very informal. It wasn't as an instructor. In fact, I would probably argue at that point, I probably wasn't a very good instructor, but I created an agenda and we went through these different topics and we would do some hands-on and we could walk around and have some labs, and it was a lot of fun, and we got through some technical topics. What I transitioned into, though, was more of a systems engineering position for the second half of my IT career. And so I moved from working at the corporation or organization and started working for the manufacturers of these technologies. So whether it was network troubleshooting or working in an environment where I was working with next generation firewalls as a cybersecurity engineer. Very often you're going on site where the customers are, asking them about the problems they're having, and then presenting them with a set of ideas and solutions that could potentially solve those particular problems. Well, that meant I was doing a lot of presentations. And somewhere in there, in the mix of going back and forth between technical roles, I also had a job as a director of technical marketing. So that was one where I was really describing to people around the world how these technologies work. Puts things on a website, create a press release, or go to a trade show and present in front of a bunch of people. So a lot of what I did was presentations. And I think that lent itself very well to doing this type of thing online, because talking to one person is really about the same as talking to a million people at the same time. There's really no difference. It's whether one person shows up on this live stream or whether there are, well, in the case of today, there's 156 people on talking. It's really the same conversation I'm having. And I think once you get to that point, you figure it out. That's really the key for anyone who's doing this is making sure that happens. Along those same lines, Mr. Sunshine has a question. Great name. Who says, do you have the CompTIA teaching certification, a certified technical trainer plus, CTT plus? CompTIA literally had a certification called the certified technical trainer. And they do have one. He says, any other certifications? You get certified before you make these courses? Yes and no, and no and yes and no. No, I don't think that actually answered any of those questions properly. The CompTIA did have, or maybe they still have, the certified technical trainer, but they've recently announced that they are phasing out that certification. So CompTIA no longer, or very quickly will no longer offer that technical teaching certification. Because I teach online to you with no third party. I don't work for a third party company. I don't have a training company that pays me. I don't do training classes at a training company. I'm my own boss. So I don't have to have a CompTIA training certification because I'm the one doing the training. I don't have to prove to myself that I'm capable of doing the training. Effectively, you get to tell me that. If I wasn't doing a good job, we wouldn't have a lot of people on the live stream right now. So it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I don't have to worry about getting certified in training. I already know I have experience in training, and I've already been very familiar with these technologies. Therefore, it sort of worked out that way. And I never really worked to get the CompTIA certified training because it just didn't make sense for the things we were doing here. The other part of your question, though, is do I get certified before I make these courses? And in the past, I would. If a new A+ came out, I would go take the new A+ exam. If a new Network Plus came out, I'd go take the Network Plus exam, Security Plus, and so on. And that was a great way to become familiar with the way that CompTIA asks these questions, with the way that the exams are structured. And if they were to dramatically change the way they ask questions and dramatically change the way the exams were structured, I would go take those exams so I could experience that. But after you take 3 or 4 cycles of these, you take Network Plus, then you take another Network Plus in 3 years, then you take another Network Plus in 3 years. After a while, it's the same exam every time with just minor changes. And because my background is in technology, I already know this content relatively well, enough to get through a certification exam anyway. And so I have specifically decided not to take the most recent versions of the exams. One, because I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of those at this point. And secondly, you have to sign a non-disclosure when you take this exam that you will not say anything about anything that you saw on this exam or anything about the exam process. Really, it's very specific and covers, it's like a blanket. Like, you can't talk about it. Technically, I can't tell you anything about the exam based on the candidate agreement you sign when you start the exam. So I thought, I don't want to get into any legal issues with telling people about things they could potentially find on the exam, and that non-disclosure prevents me from describing those. Well, that's sort of a problem if I want to tell people about the exam. So to avoid any worries with the non-disclosure, I simply don't put myself in a position where the non-disclosure would apply. So it's a good win-win, I think. And again, if CompTIA changes the exam, they change the way they present the questions, they change something functional about the exam, I'm absolutely going to go take that exam again, non-disclosure or not, because it's important for me to explain to you what you can expect when you go to the exam. But at this point, I got it. No, we don't have to do it another 7 times. I got it the first 6. So that's my perspective on this. And if I find myself that I'm not properly understanding something about the exam, I'll just go take it again, because I can just hop in there and go take it whenever I'd like. Now I can even do it online. I don't even have to go anywhere. I probably wouldn't do it in the studio. The studio is just this would never work for an online exam. The poor proctor, if they were to look at my camera and you have to send them pictures of your working environment, of your desk, they'd have a stroke. They'd be like, no, you can't take an exam in there. You have to go somewhere else that doesn't have all of this technology sitting around. And so I don't have somewhere else that doesn't have technology sitting around. I like going to the testing centers. And that's something I can do very easily. Just go to the testing center, take the exam. I just haven't found a good reason to do that. It's just makes sense to me. This is one about renewing a certification. This is from George, who asks, got a question about CEUs. These are continuing education units. This is the way that CompTIA it's one of the ways CompTIA is able to evaluate if you have all of the knowledge you need to be able to renew your certification. The question asks, I see teaching a class counts for CEUs because there's many different things you can do to begin collecting these continuing education units. Can that be a lunch and learn for my staff, or do they mean college/high school level teaching? They're very broad as to what that really means. So if you're in an organization and you're teaching a lunch and learn, that qualifies as 1 hour of teaching a class. So yes, that does qualify for that. I would imagine teaching some of these things online. There's an online section, and creating online content, that would also apply. So they're pretty flexible with how they fit these in. They give a little bit of context in the document that describes these CEUs, and I highly recommend you look at that. It sounds like you have already. But that's a good way to know if what you're doing really would apply. And if it's just broad in its description and it fits that description, they're going to accept that as a CEU. They really don't have much of a problem doing that if it's legitimate and you're able to show the details of that particular training class that you did. Most of the time, they don't have a problem at all with accepting that as a CEU. For those of you that haven't renewed your exam, or maybe you haven't even taken the exam yet, so you don't have to worry about renewal, collecting these CEUs is one of the methods you can use to renew your certification. But these days, you could also take the CertMaster CE. You don't have to collect CEUs for that. You could take a higher level certification. Don't have to collect CEUs for that. You can take a third-party certification. Don't have to collect CEUs for that. So this is just one of many ways that you could renew your cert. In part of this YouTube video, in the video description, I have a video listed there of how to renew your certification in just a few hours. And it's really talking about CertMaster CE, but I also talk about these other methods as well, so that you know the advantages and disadvantages of which ones of the different methods, and then you can decide which one of those you would like to follow to renew your cert. Some people like to collect CEUs. They're collecting them anyway through their normal job functions, or you might just want to take CertMaster CE and not worry about collecting CEUs. It depends on your style and what you want to be able to do, and that's just one of the many ways to make that happen. Let's do some other questions that folks have put into the chat room. I'm looking at questions that come directly from the chat room that's on YouTube or at professormesser.com/live. It's the same chat, just embedded onto my website. Other questions. Let's keep going through other ones. Let's do that. This would be a good one. I wish I could force my current boss to take updated exams. He took the A+ back when it was still a single exam. I don't know when that would be. 15 years ago, there were still 2 exams you had to take. In fact, you had to choose from 4 exams. You had to take 2 of them. I don't know a time when A+ was a single exam. Maybe it was back when there were horse and buggy, maybe. I don't know. Tell your boss he's old and he needs to get a newer exam. That's it. Tell him I say he's old. And I could say that because I'm old. It works that way. Let's do another one. More questions. Good question. This is a good one just generally that asks, what's the quickest way to contact me? Well, you just call me. I'm not going to give you the phone number, though. So don't call me. That's a bad way to contact me. Does anybody call anyone anymore? I don't think so. When my phone rings, it's a surprise. Oh, my phone's ringing. It must be a scam. It must be a spam job. We don't need to answer that one. Just tell it to go to voicemail. I think we have phones so that we can send people to voicemail. That's the only reason the voice part works anymore. I'm pretty sure. So the best way to contact me is use the Contact Us link on my website, or be able to open a ticket. If you're already a member, you already have purchased something from me, you can log into your membership area and you can open up a ticket. Tickets always get priority because you already have purchased something. You're already a member. You are already on the inside. So I want to give you priority. So if you open a ticket, you get priority. Now, the reality is I sit down and go through these multiple times a day. So you're not going to be waiting very long regardless of what you do. Opening a ticket's a great way, or clicking on Contact Us on my website's a great way. That's the two best ways to contact me. Some people will send me a note on Facebook. Not a great way to contact me, but I'll take it. Some people send me a DM on Discord. Not a great way to contact me, but that's another way. I often will go in there and answer those. But opening up a ticket inside your member login or hitting the Contact Us is really the best way. And it needs to have, just make sure that if you're using Contact Us on my website, that you put in a correct email address. There's so many times when somebody's left me a note, I have responded to the note and I get a bounce back immediately that says that email address doesn't exist. And they were asking an important question. It was a timely question. It was something they needed quickly, but they didn't type their email address properly. So make sure you do that. And being able to have those there is a great way to contact me, and then I can get back to you as quickly as possible. Other questions we have. Is the Core 2 A+ harder or easier than Core 1? For those of you not familiar with the A+ exam, there's two separate exams you have to take. The first is the Core 1 exam. This includes hardware, networking, and troubleshooting of hardware and networks. Core 2 is operating systems, security, and troubleshooting operating systems and security. There's other topics thrown in there on both of those, but that's a broad brush for both of them. The ones that are easier or harder, I would say both exams from a difficulty perspective are equally difficult. I don't think one exam has been developed or engineered to be harder than the other. I think they ask questions that are generally the same difficulty on both exams. But obviously the topics are very, very different. If you're more familiar with hardware, you've built your own computers, you've been working with memory and configuring drives and installing CPUs for a long time, then Core 1 is probably going to be easier for you. But if you're someone who's worked a lot with Windows, you're familiar with installing Windows and configuring the details of the Windows operating system and troubleshooting Windows, then probably Core 2 is going to seem easier to you because those are topics you know just a little bit better. But I think that's why that's different depending on who you ask. Some people will tell you immediately Core 2 is easier. Some people will say Core 1 is easier. Objectively, they're both about the same difficulty level. The difference is how much information you happen to know about those. So that's the important thing. And if you key in on that, I think that will help you figure out which one's harder and which one's maybe not as difficult between both of those. We were talking about renewing a certification earlier. Chris asks, if I have 3 certs, let's say you have A+, Network+, and Security+, in 3 years, do I have to take 3 different recertification training courses to recertify, or just one to update all 3? Thankfully, CompTIA says you only have to renew your highest level certification, and CompTIA has a list of those levels on their website. So if you have an A+, a Network+, and a Security+ certification, they are A+ is at the lower level, Network+ is in the middle, and Security+ is the highest level of those 3 exams. So if your A+ is coming due, your A+ is going to expire in a month, you could just renew A+, but it's only going to renew your A+ certification. What you need to renew is your Security+, and when you renew Security+, it also renews Network+, and it also renews A+, all at the same time, and puts the renewal date on the same day. So that makes it a little bit easier. You don't have to go through renewing 3 separate certification exams. You just renew the single exam. You get Cert Master CE for Security Plus. You finish it. You've now renewed all 3 exams. You take the latest version of the Security Plus exam that renews Security Plus and everything underneath. You collect enough CEUs to renew your Security Plus. It automatically renews your Network Plus and A Plus as well. So that's it. That's what you want to do, is just find the highest level, focus on that one. It takes care of everything underneath. Just make sure you get it all done before any of those lower level exams was to expire, and you'll be just fine. Other questions. This one deals with next generation firewalls, which I am intimately familiar with. Let's Play asks, are network intrusion prevention systems embedded within next generation firewalls? Absolutely are. Probably the IPS that's in a next gen firewall is much better than an IPS that you would find standalone. In fact, I'm not sure anyone makes standalone IPSs anymore. At one point, Tipping Point still had some going. They got bought. We had some from SourceFire. They got bought. Was I thinking the right one? There were other standalone IPSs out there that have ultimately been acquired by Cisco and other companies. And I think pretty much all of those have been phased out, because why would you buy a standalone IPS when that functionality and, in fact, better IPS functionality is integrated into a next generation firewall? So the question now becomes, well, why is it better? Why is an integrated next-gen firewall a better IPS than a standalone IPS, and that's all it does? That goes against what we're always told with technology. Because with technology, we're always told, if you need to route, just buy a router, a standalone device, and that router is designed to route. That's all it does. And so it's going to do it much better than a device that somehow integrates a router within it. So that's a good question. And it's because the functions of a next generation firewall extend and make IPSs better. And probably the biggest reason for that is that every attack on these systems, if it's an operating system or an application, they're going against and trying to find a vulnerability with an app or with an OS, which ultimately is running an application inside of it that they're trying to exploit. Well, if you have a firewall that recognizes the applications that are in use and that also check for vulnerabilities that are being attacked on those applications, it's a much more accurate IPS. A standalone IPS, in the old school IPS, if you will, that has no knowledge of applications, can only rely on its signatures. But a signature that's attacking one application is the same as a signature attacking any other application. Now you're not sure if you've got a false positive or if you've really got a real attack. With the next-gen firewall, the context narrows so that you know not only do we see the attack they're trying to perform, we can see what application they're using to attack, and we know what application they're attacking. Therefore, we can be much more precise with telling you that this is a real attack and that you can feel more comfortable blocking that attack and knowing that it wasn't a false positive. So next-gen firewalls are phenomenal IPSs. And in almost every way better than a standalone IPS. And I can tell you, for someone who has worked with these next-gen firewalls intimately at the very detailed level for years and years and years and years, and implemented especially IPS-type functionality in these next-gen firewalls, they are fast because they're hardware-based. They are accurate because they have all of this other context based on the entire traffic flow. And they're great IPSs. Because we already know how to do IPS, let's just put in a next-gen firewall. And it's extremely fast. You know, multi-gig throughput for an IPS used to be very difficult to do. Now it's a normal thing. It's built into these next-gen firewalls that has all of that power inside of it. And that's the real key, and being able to work through it. To follow up on that, Let's Play says, Palo Alto and Cisco are direct competitors. I guess with some products, they certainly are. If you go back and look at the timeline for Cisco, and this is probably, this is over 10 years ago, when Cisco was changing the way they looked at their company. They were changing the context of the type of company they wanted to be. In fact, at one point, they even said, we don't want to be a hardware company anymore. We want to be a software company. And about that same time, they said, we're going to focus on 4 separate business units. We're going to focus on routing, switching. We're going to focus on this. We're going to focus on this. We're going to focus on this. They laid out this plan to focus on these 4 core technologies. None of them were security. It was a huge misstep by Cisco, an unexpected and unusual misstep for a company that traditionally has been very well versed and very focused on what their customers wanted. And most people looked at that and said, why did they just leave security out in the cold? And in fact, not only did they say that, they actually did it. They let their firewalls sort of stagnate a bit. At that time, talk about timing in the world of business and talk about how someone can take advantage of a misstep. About that time, this unknown company that did not exist in the world and created a product that no one had ever seen before called Palo Alto Networks suddenly emerged and said, well, Cisco's not helping you, but we've got technology nobody's ever seen before that you won't believe actually works, and it does it remarkably well. It does exactly what we tell you it does, which, by the way, is also a weird thing to find in the industry. And so for the next 5 years, I replaced a lot of Cisco firewalls because Cisco wasn't supporting their customers for whatever reason. Now, at that time, once they realized, wow, we're losing a lot of revenue, let's get back on the security boat. So after about 5 years, they decided, no, we were just kidding. Sorry about that whole security thing. I don't know what we were thinking. It was crazy. I know. We're totally doing security. And so they started buying companies and started shoring up their security portfolio again. But it was that 5 or 6 year misstep where they were just crickets. There was nothing going on in Cisco in the world of security, and they weren't interested in it. And I think internally, if you looked at numbers, that might have made sense for them. But if you looked at the broad scope of what the industry was doing, made no sense whatsoever. And so Palo Alto Networks thrived, not only because they had an exceptional product. And I say that I don't work there anymore. I have no stock anymore in that company. It was just an amazing product to work with. From a technical perspective, as a technologist, as a systems engineer who had to support that product and work with that product, it was a dream. It was a dream. It did exactly what we said it did. And it was just a pleasure to work with that technology. It just happened to be at the same time, we couldn't believe it. Cisco said, no, we don't need security. That's like shooting fish in a barrel. So, of course, Palo Alto Networks went public. Of course, they did amazing amount of sales, just huge amounts of sales. The growth was ridiculous. Well, why not? The biggest company in the industry dropped out of the whole race and left the whole thing wide open for someone to walk in and change the platform, and change it they did. And Palo Alto Networks was not just born, it was rocketed to the top. Just remarkable. And to be fair, that wasn't the success of Palo Alto Networks wasn't because Cisco decided to take their eye off the ball. It really was an amazing product. The people who run that company are remarkable technologists. They are the smartest people in the industry. Today, I tell you, they are the smartest people in the security industry by far running the show there. And they have a very well-honed and well-structured set of security implementations and plans because they're so directly tied to their customers. They know exactly what their customers are telling them, and they implement that in the product. It's remarkable. There's good parts and bad parts of any company, but that was just one that Palo Alto Networks fires on all cylinders. They really got it going. It's their race to lose at this point. We'll put it that way. We'll see what happens with them. See where we go and making that happen. Let's see. Other questions you have coming in. Let's do another one here. Spec says, do you have any suggestions of a list of ticketing systems to familiarize ourselves with that are common at a large number of companies? It's difficult because if you want to create a ticketing system that corporations use, you have to somehow get access to those. And generally, there's a large cost associated with gaining access to those. The reality, though, and I go back to the days of Network Associates, which was a McAfee entity. McAfee changed their name to Network Associates, and I worked at McAfee at the time. Network Associates was one that had a couple of help desk platforms. They had one in-house, then they bought another one. They might have bought two separate help desks. At one time, they had a lot of different help desks that they owned. And the one thing I found with all of them is that they were all pretty much the same. The process is the same regardless of what software you're using. You answer the phone, you find out who you're talking to, you find out what they're using, you're filling in blanks or pull downs in your ticketing system, you're writing up a description of the problem, you're submitting that ticket to somebody who you recognize this is the group should be handling that, and you can forward that ticket onto that group. It's all the same. As someone in the chat room has already mentioned, ServiceNow is a big one that's in the industry. That's a very common one to use. I don't think ServiceNow has a free or a low-cost implementation on their side. I may be wrong at this point because I haven't looked in a little while. But I have found a number of different free or close to being free implementations of service desks that are available on the internet that you could use as a trial or at least to get familiar with what help desk systems are about. But there are plenty of ServiceNow videos out on the YouTube that you could look at that can take you through some of those. That's a good thing to go through. And I think many of those people in the chat room have used Spiceworks. Other folks have used Remedy. These are old school. Remedy is definitely old school when it comes to help desk software. What was the one I was using in my A+ videos? There's a section of A+ now that talks about help desk, Active Directory, and other things. Now, I got a free one on the internet to step through, but I just took screenshots from that because it's the same regardless of what help desk you're using. Who's calling you? What's the categorization of their problem? What's the description of the problem? And who should this ticket be submitted to? And you sort of step through those pieces. The A+ exam objectives do a very good job of breaking that out for you, so you know exactly which ones to go through. But those are pretty good to step through. You should be able to find something on the internet to break that out. So I think that's close to what you might find from a help desk perspective. I think those are pretty good. And then really, no matter what you're faced with, most help desks have all the same type of functions inside of them. It's a very standard application. Maybe they give you a little bit of customization. I've worked with help desks that were built third party as a platform as a service on, and so they've gone to Salesforce.com and used the platform as a service function of Salesforce.com to put together the modules to build their own help desks. So you don't necessarily have to buy a help desk from a third party. You could build it yourself because it's always the same type of thing. Who's calling in? What's their problem? Where does this problem go? And then more details about it, and then a way to track that over time. So there's probably as many options for help desks as there is practically anything else there on the internet. It's a pretty big market for companies. There's a lot of money to be made with help desks, and it's difficult to find good ones. Unfortunately, it's like anything else. They told me it would do that. Well, it doesn't do that. And now we have to kind of integrate help desks. Can we use it remotely from home? Is there a web-based front end? Is there a way to automate ticket submission so we don't take phone calls? Is there integration into our Active Directory? There's all these things that are commonly used or commonly required when it comes to help desk software. So there's absolutely some options out there that you could look at, but any one of them is pretty much the same as any other, at least at a very broad level that we are dealing with from a perspective of A+, Network Plus, or Security Plus. So all of those would work out, I think. Those would be good places to go and good things to look at. And I think that's the best way to kind of approach those. Well, at this point, I know we've had network outages early. We kind of extended out the time frame of the study group just a little bit, so you would be able to at least get the full set of questions for the first part. And I did want to give you at least an hour. We went over a little bit here of Q&A here in the after show, just so we can really get everything answered for the questions I had and the questions you had. I think we had a pretty good day of it. It was a rocky start, but we made it all the way to the end. Thanks for hanging in there with us all the way to the end. We really do appreciate that. We do one of these Network Plus study groups every month. Our next study group will be next month, but you can always come back next week. On Wednesday, we have our Security Plus study group where I have brand new questions from the Security Plus exam, and you would be able to join us not only for the Q&A part at the beginning, but we also have an after show for Security Plus where you can also ask any question you'd like about anything Security Plus or otherwise. We'd love for you to come back then as well. Thanks for joining us. And we will see you next time on the Network Plus study group. Thanks, everybody. See you then.